Hidden deep beneath stone corridors, sealed by wax and shadow, lies a secret the world was never meant to see. An archivist, searching for nothing more than dust and parchment, stumbles upon a whisper carried through the marble halls. A whisper that speaks of gospels erased from history, gospels said to shine too brightly for the world to bear. Candles burn in rooms that have been locked for centuries. Portraits move their eyes. Keys appear where no hand has placed them. And with each secret uncovered, the walls themselves seem to breathe with warning. But the deeper the search goes, the more dangerous the truth becomes. Because these gospels are not only words on a page, they are alive. And once read, they cannot be forgotten. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the revelations ahead. What if the greatest mystery of faith was the one hidden from you all along? Night settled over Vatican City like a gentle benediction, and the rain began to whisper against ancient stone. Each droplet traced silver paths down the cobblestones of St. Anne's Gate, carrying the day's prayers into the earth below, where forgotten catacombs held the dreams of early martyrs. The water pooled in worn grooves carved by centuries of pilgrims' feet, reflecting the amber glow of lanterns that flickered like earthbound stars along the shadowed walls. Matteo drew his worn coat closer as he turned the brass key in the library doors, the metal singing softly in the lock with a note that seemed to harmonize with the storm's distant murmur. His fingers, stained with ink from decades of careful restoration work, lingered on the ancient handle, bronze worn smooth by countless hands that had sought the same sanctuary of knowledge he had come to revere. The Dome of Saint. Peter's caught the lightning's brief kiss, glowing pale as moonlight against the storm clouds that gathered like brooding angels above the eternal city. For a moment, Matteo paused on the rain-slicked steps, watching how the sacred architecture seemed to breathe with the thunder's rhythm, the great columns appearing to sway slightly in the shifting light. Some said the Vatican held secrets in its very foundations, mysteries that stirred when darkness fell and the weight of day's ceremonies gave way to night's deeper contemplations. The massive bronze doors closed behind him with a whisper that seemed to seal away the world beyond. Inside the archive hall, his footsteps echoed like hushed prayers offered in an empty cathedral. Centuries of knowledge lined these walls, manuscripts that had witnessed empires rise and fall, gospels copied by trembling hands in candlelit scriptoriums, letters sealed with papal rings, long since turned to dust in forgotten tombs. The air itself felt heavy with whispered confessions and silent devotions, thick with the memory of incense and the weight of countless hours spent in sacred study. Between the towering shelves, shadows pooled like dark water, and the scent of aged parchment mingled with traces of frankincense that seemed to drift from the very stones. Ancient volumes bound in leather, cracked with age, stood sentinel in their cases, their gilt letters catching what little light filtered through the tall windows. Matteo had walked these halls for 20 years, yet tonight they felt different somehow, expectant, as though the very walls were holding their breath. As Matteo checked the manuscript cases, ensuring each ancient treasure rested safely in its place, his weathered hands moved with the practiced reverence of one who understood that he was merely a guardian of something far greater than himself. He paused before a illuminated psalter, its gold leaf still gleaming despite 8 centuries of existence, its margins decorated with tiny angels whose painted faces seemed to watch him with knowing eyes. It was then that a sound drifted through the marble corridors, not quite music, not quite speech, but something softer than either, something that seemed to emerge from between the very molecules of air. His breath caught in his throat, and his hand stilled on the glass case. The library stood empty. He had watched the last scholar depart hours ago, had heard the echo of Father Giuseppe's sandals fade down the corridor as the old priest returned to his evening prayers. The whisper came again, carried on air that seemed to shimmer with its own light, as though starlight had been woven into sound. It spoke no words he could understand, yet something in his chest recognized its cadence, as though his heart remembered a song it had never learned, a melody that predated language itself. The voice seemed to emerge from the sealed chamber at the hall's far end, a room that had remained locked since before his grandfather's time, its heavy wooden door bound with iron bands that had rusted to the color of dried blood. Matteo's fingers trembled as he lifted the final lantern from its hook, its flame dancing like a captured star within the protective glass. The whisper faded as he moved closer to the sealed door, his soft-soled shoes making no sound on the ancient stones, leaving only the rain's gentle percussion against the tall windows and the distant rumble of thunder rolling across the 7 hills of Rome. He pressed his palm against the cold stone of the doorframe, feeling the weight of centuries beneath his touch, sensing the presence of something that waited in patient silence beyond the threshold. The iron lock was massive, ancient, its surface carved with symbols that predated Christian Rome, spirals and circles that spoke of older mysteries, of faiths that had walked these hills when they were still crowned with pagan temples. As his fingers traced the weathered metal, the whisper seemed to pulse from within the chamber, growing neither louder nor softer, but somehow more present, as though it were calling specifically to him. With a breath that misted in the cooling air, he blew out the lantern's flame, watching as the golden light died and darkness embraced the hall like velvet, wrapping the manuscripts in protective shadow. The rain continued its ancient conversation with the stones outside, and somewhere in the depths of the Vatican, a bell tolled the hour with solemn precision. As his footsteps carried him slowly towards the entrance, each echo seeming to linger longer than it should in the vast space, the whisper returned once more, softer now, tender as a lullaby carried on the night wind, patient as eternity itself. It seemed to follow him, not pursuing, but accompanying, like a blessing spoken in a language older than words. The Vatican kept its secrets well, but tonight, one secret had chosen to call his name, and Matteo knew with the quiet certainty of faith that his life was about to change in ways he could not yet imagine. Morning light spilled across the Vatican courtyard like honey poured from heaven's cup, warming the ancient stones that had witnessed centuries of prayer and pilgrimage. The cobblestones seemed to exhale the coolness of night, releasing tiny wisps of mist that caught the early sunbeams and transformed them into threads of gold. Matteo's fingers traced the ring of keys the head librarian had pressed into his palm hours before, each metal surface still carrying the warmth of the elder's weathered hands. Each key gleamed with its own particular character, brass worn to the color of autumn leaves, iron blackened by age and reverence, silver that caught the light like captured starshine. Their teeth had been worn smooth by generations of faithful hands, each groove and notch telling stories of doors opened in darkness, of secrets revealed to those who served with quiet devotion. The weight of them in his palm felt heavier than their metal alone could account for. as if they carried the accumulated trust of all who had held them before. The bronze doors loomed before him, their massive presence both invitation and guardian. Each panel had been etched with scenes from scripture by craftsmen who understood that beauty itself was a form of prayer. Angels spread their wings across the metal surface, their faces turned toward heaven with expressions of eternal wonder. Saints knelt in gardens of bronze roses, their hands raised in gestures of surrender and praise. The morning sun caught each raised detail, turning the entire surface to liquid gold that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. Matteo remembered the head librarian's words, spoken in that characteristic measured tone that made even the simplest observations sound like ancient wisdom. Some locks yield to more than metal, Matteo. The old texts speak of keys fashioned from prayer itself, of doors that recognize the heart's intention before the hand even reaches for the handle. The elder's eyes had held a distant look, as if seeing through layers of time to truths that lay buried beneath centuries of careful silence. A breeze stirred the hem of Matteo's coat, carrying with it the scent of jasmine from the papal gardens, and something else, something that reminded him of incense and old parchment, of mysteries preserved in darkness. He studied the intricate panels before him, noting how the bronze seemed to shimmer with each shift of light. Saints and angels gazed down at him from their eternal poses, their expressions caught between revelation and warning, as if they knew secrets they longed to share, but were bound by sacred silence. The morning sun climbed higher, transforming each bronze figure into something almost alive. Shadows moved across the metal surface like whispered conversations, deepening the carved lines until they seemed to pulse with hidden meaning. Matteo felt drawn to touch the surface, to trace the outlines of wings and halos, but something held him back, a sense that this moment required a different kind of approach. Matteo lowered himself to his knees, feeling the cool stone beneath him like a benediction. The ancient cobblestones had been worn smooth by countless pilgrims who had knelt in this very spot, seeking blessing, guidance, or simply the peace that came from surrendering to something greater than themselves. The keys clinked softly as he set them aside, their metal voices singing a quiet song against the stone. His palm pressed flat against the ground, fingers spread wide, connecting him to the earth beneath and to centuries of others who had knelt here before him in hope and humility. The air shifted around him, subtle as a sigh. A current of warmth brushed his face like gentle breath, though no one stood near. The sensation carried with it a quality of presence, as if invisible hands were reaching out to touch his forehead in blessing. It reminded him of stories whispered between archive shelves during the quiet hours, tales of doors that opened only to the pure of heart, of passages that appeared to those who sought with love rather than ambition, of keys that turned not through force but through faith. Through half-closed eyes, he watched dust motes dance in the cathedral of sunbeams that fell between the courtyard walls. They swirled in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, as if invisible fingers were writing messages in the golden light. Words in a language older than Latin, older than speech itself. The silence around him felt full, rather than empty, pregnant with possibilities that hovered just beyond the edge of understanding. Time moved differently in this sacred space. Minutes might have been hours, or hours mere heartbeats. The sun traced its ancient path across the stone, painting shadows that lengthened and shortened like the breathing of some vast, sleeping presence. Matteo remained motionless, feeling his own breathing slow and deepen until it matched the rhythm of the morning itself. Hours later, as afternoon shadows began to claim the courtyard, Matteo placed the ring of keys on his desk in the small apartment that served as his sanctuary within the Vatican's labyrinthine walls. The metal surfaces caught the lamplight, casting intricate shadows across the paper scattered on his desk. Manuscripts he'd been cataloguing, notes written in his careful script, fragments of ancient texts that spoke of mysteries he was only beginning to glimpse. His small dwelling sat quiet around him, filled with the gentle presence of books and the rhythmic ticking of an old clock that marked time like a meditation bell. The apartment held the accumulated silence of years spent in contemplation. Books lined every wall, their spines creating a tapestry of knowledge in multiple languages and centuries. Some volumes stood upright in neat rows, while others lay horizontal, their pages marked with slips of paper where he'd found passages that spoke to his soul. A single window looked out onto a hidden garden where moonflowers bloomed in the darkness, their white petals glowing like stars fallen to earth. Sleep pulled at his thoughts with gentle insistence as he sank into his favorite chair, its worn leather shaped by countless hours of reading and reflection. The weight of the day's mysteries settled around his shoulders like a benediction, and his eyes grew heavy with the sweet exhaustion that comes from touching the edge of something sacred. The whisper found him there in that liminal space between waking and dreaming, sliding through the darkness like silk moved by invisible hands. This time, it carried something new. His name, spoken with the gentleness of falling snow, with the tenderness of a mother calling her child home. Matteo, it breathed, and in that single word lay an ocean of meaning he couldn't yet grasp. Promise and invitation, mystery and homecoming, all woven together in a voice that seemed to emerge from the very walls around him, from the stones themselves, from the heart of something vast and loving that had been waiting patiently for him to finally hear. The tolling of midnight bells drew Matteo from his restless dreams, each bronze note reverberating through the stone walls of his modest quarters like ripples across still water. His small room felt thick with shadows that seemed to breathe and shift in the corners, while the whisper that had followed him home from the archives now pulled at the edges of his consciousness with gentle, persistent fingers. The bronze keys on his wooden desk caught the pale moonlight streaming through his narrow window, casting strange, dancing patterns on the whitewashed wall that reminded him of ancient script he could not quite read. His bare feet carried him through the silent corridors of Vatican City, the cool marble beneath his steps like touching the surface of a sleeping lake. The night guards nodded respectfully as he passed. They had grown accustomed to seeing him, the quiet archivist who kept strange hours among the books, wandering the halls when most of Rome lay wrapped in slumber. Their lanterns cast long shadows that stretched and contracted as he moved deeper into the heart of the complex. The massive archive doors, heavy with centuries of secrets, groaned open beneath his gentle touch, welcoming him into their embrace like an old friend. "Hello?" His voice disappeared into the vast darkness beyond, swallowed by the waiting silence, as though the very air absorbed his words before they could travel far. The familiar scent of ancient paper and cracked leather bindings wrapped around him like a comforting cloak. But tonight something else threaded through the air, the faintest trace of frankincense he had never noticed before, sweet and mysterious, carrying whispers of prayers long forgotten. Down the narrow aisles he walked with reverent steps, past towering rows of manuscripts that stood like silent sentinels in the darkness, their spines catching occasional glints of moonlight that filtered through the high windows. Each footfall echoed softly in the cathedral-like space until he reached the sealed chamber at the far end, where legend said the most precious texts lay hidden from mortal eyes. A golden glow seeped beneath the heavy wooden door, warm and inviting, like honey poured into darkness. "That's not possible," Matteo breathed, his words barely more than a whisper. He pressed his palm against the aged wood, feeling the grain beneath his fingertips, worn smooth by countless hands across the centuries. The door swung inward without resistance, though he knew it had been locked and sealed for decades, its secrets guarded by Vatican decree and the weight of time itself. There, upon a stone altar that stood bare except for a thin layer of undisturbed dust, burned a single white candle. Its flame stood perfectly still in the airless chamber, casting a sphere of warm golden light that pushed back the darkness with gentle authority. The wax showed no signs of melting, no pool of spent tallow gathering at its base. No matches lay nearby on the ancient stone. No footprints marked the dust-covered floor that stretched before the altar like an unbroken carpet of time. The very air felt undisturbed, as though the chamber had remained sealed and untouched since the day it was last blessed and closed to the world. "Who lit you?" Matteo whispered to the flame, his voice carrying a note of wonder rather than fear. The candle flickered once, just once, as if in gentle response to his question, and he felt his heart skip with quiet amazement. He approached slowly, each step careful and measured, his hands folded respectfully before him, as he had been taught to walk in sacred spaces. The candlelight remained perfectly steady, neither growing brighter nor diminishing as he drew near, as constant as a lighthouse beacon guiding ships through midnight waters. Something about its warm glow reminded him of the whispers that had led him here through the darkened halls. Both carried the same quality of patience, the same sense of being ancient beyond measure, waiting through countless seasons for this very moment. Without thinking, moved by an impulse he could not name, Matteo reached out with trembling fingers and cupped his hand around the dancing flame. Where there should have been searing heat that would make him cry out in pain, he felt only the most gentle warmth, like afternoon sunlight filtering through stained glass to caress his skin. The fire danced between his fingers with impossible grace, alive and vital, but entirely harmless, as though it recognized his touch and welcomed it. Through the high-arched windows of the chamber, the first pale threads of dawn began to paint the eastern sky in soft shades of rose and gold, announcing the end of night's mysteries and the return of the waking world. Matteo slowly withdrew his hand from the flame and stepped back with profound reverence, leaving the mysterious candle to continue its patient vigil. As he gently closed the chamber door behind him, the sacred flame continued to burn in its solitude, a golden star gleaming steadily in the darkness, keeping its ancient secret safe for another turning of the earth, waiting for the next soul brave enough to seek its light. Morning light spilled through the high windows like liquid gold, casting long beams across the ancient archive where Matteo moved with his customary quiet reverence. The air held that peculiar stillness that comes only to sacred places at dawn, when even the stones seemed to whisper their prayers to the rising sun. He pulled open another creaking drawer, its bronze handles worn smooth by countless hands before his, and felt the familiar thrill of discovery stirring in his chest. His fingers brushed against brittle parchment, each sheet carefully preserved despite centuries of patient neglect. The scent of age and ink rose around him like incense, that distinctive perfume of old paper and faded words that had become as dear to him as any blessing. Some said the Vatican's archives held more secrets than all the confessionals in Rome combined, and in moments like these, Matteo wondered if they might be right. A bundle of letters caught his eye, bound with a simple cord of faded silk. These were not catalogued, bore no official seals or crimson ribbons. The handwriting flowed across the yellowed pages in personal strokes, intimate and unguarded, far from the formal script of Vatican documents that he knew so well. His breath caught in his throat as he recognized the signature of Pope Celestine V, written in the trembling hand of a man who had carried the world upon his shoulders. "I cannot bear this crown," the words whispered from the page, each letter formed with obvious anguish. "The weight crushes my spirit like stones upon my chest. I am a simple hermit, called from my mountain cave to wear robes too heavy for my soul. God forgive me, but I dream of my mountain cell, of silence and prayer, without the burden of nations watching my every breath." Matteo's hands trembled as he held the precious document. He knew from his studies that Celestine had abdicated, the only pope in history to willingly surrender the keys of heaven, but to read his private fears, to touch the very paper that had absorbed his tears. The letter continued, each word a confession never meant for human eyes. "The marble halls echo with my footsteps, but they sound like the steps of a stranger. When I bless the faithful, I wonder if my hands are clean enough to carry such grace." Another letter emerged from the bundle, this one from Urban VII, written in a more urgent script. "Only 3 days I have worn the ring of Peter," the Pope had written, "yet already I feel death's shadow creeping through the Vatican's corridors. The physicians speak in whispers, but I know what awaits. What if I have not the strength to bear this burden? What if I am not worthy of the throne that has been given to me? Sometimes I wake in the deep of night and wonder if God has made a terrible mistake." The whispers stirred around Matteo then, soft as moth wings brushing against the window panes. They seemed to echo the ancient doubts, giving voice to words never meant to be heard by any ear save God's own. The archive itself appeared to lean closer, as if the very walls hungered to hear these long-buried confessions once more. I wake in darkness, read a third letter, this one unsigned, but bearing the papal seal, and wonder if all my certainty was nothing more than pride wearing the mask of faith. The marble halls grow longer with each passing night, the shadows deeper and more full of whispers. Sometimes I think I hear voices in the darkness, not angels, but the cries of those I have failed, those I have blessed with trembling hands and an uncertain heart. Sheet after sheet revealed the human hearts beneath papal robes, their crushing loneliness, their midnight struggles with faith, their fears of failing both God and the millions who looked to Rome for guidance. Each letter was a window into souls that had carried unimaginable burdens in perfect silence, their doubts locked away in chambers no cardinal was ever meant to enter. Matteo touched each page with gentle reverence, feeling a deep kinship with these men who had worn the white robes while their hearts remained achingly, beautifully human. The sun crept across the archive floor as he read, painting the ancient stones in amber light that seemed to pulse with each revealed secret. Dust motes danced in the golden beams like tiny prayers ascending toward heaven, and somewhere in the distance, a bell tower chimed the hours with its bronze voice. At last, when the final confession had been read and absorbed into his grateful heart, Matteo folded the letters with careful hands and returned them to their drawer. The whispers that had accompanied his reading faded like evening mist dissolving into twilight. Long shadows stretched between the towering shelves as day surrendered to dusk, and the archive settled into its familiar nocturnal hush. In the growing darkness, Matteo sat quietly in his wooden chair, holding the weight of centuries of secret doubts in his heart like a sacred trust. The silence felt different now, not empty, but full of understanding, rich with the knowledge that even the most exalted among men had wrestled with the same fears that haunted every human soul. There were those who said the Vatican's greatest treasures were its golden chalices and jeweled crosses. But Matteo knew better. The true riches lay in moments like these, when the barriers between past and present dissolved, and the honest fears of long-dead popes whispered their eternal truths into a humble archivist's willing heart. Rain pattered against the leaded glass windows in gentle, persistent rhythms as Matteo's footsteps echoed up the tight spiral of ancient stone steps. Each step carried the weight of centuries, worn smooth by countless pilgrims of knowledge who had climbed this same path before him. His hand traced the worn banister, its surface polished to silk by the touch of passing palms. Archivists, scholars, and seekers who had walked these halls when the stones were young. The higher library level opened before him like a cathedral of wisdom, its shelves stretching endlessly into darkness beneath soaring vaulted ceilings. Moonlight filtered through tall windows, casting silver patterns across leather spines that held the whispered secrets of ages. The air itself seemed thick with reverence, each breath carrying the faint scent of parchment and sacred ink. He pulled a leather-bound catalogue from its resting place on the shelf, the binding soft and supple from centuries of careful handling. Its pages crackled like autumn leaves as he turned them, each sound a small prayer in the hushed sanctuary of knowledge. Row after row of meticulous script flowed before his eyes, records of treasures both revealed and concealed. Then a notation caught his eye, just 3 lines of faded script, nearly lost in the margins like a secret meant for him alone. Gospel of light, removed by order of his holiness, words too bright for mortal eyes, sealed where heaven meets stone. The whisper returned, softer than the rain outside, gentler than the turning of pages. Seek. Matteo's fingers trembled as he traced the words, feeling the subtle impressions the ancient quill had left in the parchment. Too bright for mortal eyes, he murmured, his voice barely disturbing the sacred silence. Other texts he had encountered spoke of condemned gospels, heretical writings burned in courtyards or buried in forgotten vaults, but this felt profoundly different. This wasn't hidden out of fear or shame, but out of something far more tender, protection. He found more fragments scattered through the catalogues like breadcrumbs leading toward revelation. Some written in elegant Latin, others in flowing Greek, and a few in languages he didn't recognize. Scripts that seemed to dance across the page with their own quiet music. All spoke of the same luminous mystery, radiance that lived within words, of texts that glowed on the page like captured starlight, of readers who wept at their beauty and felt their hearts transformed by grace. Where heaven and stone touch, he repeated, his voice a whisper of wonder. His gaze drifted upward to the ribbed vaults overhead, where shadows played between ancient stones. The Vatican held countless places where mortal architecture reached toward the infinite sky. The great dome that crowned St. Peter's, the slender towers that pierced the clouds, the pointed pinnacles of 100 chapels where prayers rose like incense. A cool breeze brushed against his neck, carrying with it the faint scent of night-blooming jasmine from the gardens below. He turned toward a narrow window, watching rain stream down the ancient glass in silver rivulets. Through the distorted panes, stars flickered in breaks between the drifting clouds, each one a distant candle lit by divine hands. One star blazed brighter than all the others, seeming to pulse with its own sacred rhythm. Unlike its companions, this celestial light didn't dance or waver. It burned steady and pure, constant as the mysterious candle that had waited for him in the archive. As Matteo watched, transfixed, its radiance seemed to intensify, as if this distant star was somehow returning his gaze with living awareness, recognizing in him a kindred seeker of hidden truths. The whisper came again, clear as crystal water flowing over ancient stones, above and below. Pale light crept over the Vatican walls as Matteo crossed the dew-slit cobblestones, each step leaving faint impressions in the morning moisture. The courtyard stretched empty before him, vast and silent as a cathedral nave. St. Peter's dome loomed like a dark shadow against the pearl-grey sky, its familiar silhouette both comforting and mysterious in the pre-dawn hush. His own steps clicked soft and steady across the ancient stones, a gentle rhythm that seemed to whisper secrets to the sleeping city. Click, click, click. The echoes continued after his feet stopped moving. Matteo froze mid-stride, his breath catching in his throat as the sound circled behind him. Precise footfalls that belonged to no visible person, no earthly form. The phantom steps moved with deliberate purpose, neither hurried nor hesitant, as if their owner had walked these stones for centuries. Cold air brushed the back of his neck like invisible fingers, carrying with it the faint scent of frankincense and old prayers. "Hello?" His whisper scattered into the dawn, swallowed by the vastness of the courtyard. The phantom steps drew closer, circling around him like a patient predator, or perhaps a guardian. There was something almost protective in their measured cadence, something that spoke of watchful care rather than menace. Matteo backed slowly toward the weathered statue of St. Peter, its bronze form darkened by centuries of Roman weather. The apostle's foot had been worn smooth as riverstone from countless pilgrim touches, each caress a prayer, each prayer a hope carried on the morning wind. Click, click. The sound paused, hanging in the air like a held breath. A flutter of wings erupted overhead, dozens of sleeping doves bursting into sudden flight, their wings cutting silver arcs through the pearl-soft morning air. The birds wheeled once, twice around the courtyard in perfect formation before vanishing over the basilica's terracotta roof, leaving only the echo of their passage and a few scattered feathers drifting down like blessings. Matteo pressed his spine against the cool stone of the statue's base, feeling the solid weight of history beneath his shoulders. His heart thundered in his chest, each beat echoing the phantom footsteps that had stalked him through the empty plaza. The morning air hung thick with presence, as if the very stones of Vatican City held their breath, waiting for some ancient promise to be fulfilled. Every shadow seemed alive with possibility, every corner hiding whispers of forgotten prayers. He closed his eyes and listened to the silence that wasn't truly silent at all. Somewhere in the distance, early morning birds began their tentative songs. The fountain in the center of the plaza trickled its eternal music, and beneath it all, that patient presence waited, neither threatening nor departing. "I understand," he whispered to the empty courtyard, his voice barely audible above the morning breeze. "You want me to follow?" The first ray of sunlight speared through the colonnade, casting long shadows across the plaza, like the fingers of some celestial clock marking the hours of revelation. Golden light touched the tips of the ancient columns, slowly creeping down their weathered surfaces as Rome awakened to another day of miracles and mysteries. Matteo placed his hand on St. Peter's foot, feeling the smooth bronze beneath his palm, still cool from the night, but warming under the gentle caress of dawn. "I'll find what you're trying to show me," he murmured, his words a vow spoken to the listening stones. "Whatever it takes, wherever it leads, through shadow or light, through doubt or faith, I give you my word." The morning bells began to toll, their deep resonance washing over the courtyard like waves of liquid gold. The sound rose and fell in ancient rhythm, carrying away the last traces of otherworldly footsteps and replacing them with the familiar comfort of daily prayer. But even as the bronze voices sang their morning song, Matteo knew the phantom presence had not truly departed. It had simply stepped back into the shadows, patient as eternity itself. The mystery had chosen him, and there would be no peace until he unveiled its truth. Sunlight spilled through the high windows of the archive like honey poured from heaven, casting long fingers of gold across shelves that held the whispered dreams of centuries. The beams danced with motes of dust that seemed to carry the prayers of those who had walked these halls before. Matteo's footsteps echoed off marble worn smooth by generations of seekers, each soft sound a gentle percussion in the sacred silence as he made his way toward the sealed section, where centuries of secrets slumbered behind brass and wood like sleeping children waiting to be awakened. There were those who said the Vatican archives held more mysteries than stars in the Roman sky. Some whispered that certain texts chose their own moment to be discovered, that the ancient words themselves guided the hands that would find them. Matteo had always moved through these halls with the reverence of one who understood he walked among living history. But today, something felt different. A stirring in the air, an anticipation that made his heart beat just a little faster. A flash of wrong caught his eye, sharp as a discordant note in a cathedral hymn. Cabinet number 7. Its door gaped open a hair's width, defying decades of careful preservation and the unspoken laws that govern this sacred space. The sight struck him like a bell tolling in the distance, unexpected and profound. Matteo's breath caught in his chest, and for a moment the world seemed to pause around him, waiting. The papal seal that had guarded the cabinet for longer than he had drawn breath lay split in 2 perfect halves, resting on the marble floor like broken promises. The crimson wax gleamed in the golden light, each half smooth and clean, as though cleaved by an invisible blade guided by divine intention rather than human hands. "Impossible," he whispered, and his voice seemed to be absorbed by the ancient stones themselves. His fingers traced the break with the gentleness of one touching a holy relic. The wax showed no tool marks, no scratches, no signs of earthly tampering. The edges were smooth as river stones, perfect as though shaped by angels. It was as if time itself had decided the moment had come, as if the very universe had conspired to open what had been closed. Inside the cabinet, leather-bound volumes lined the shelves in neat rows, like soldiers standing at eternal attention. Each book seemed to pulse with its own quiet dignity, filled with words that had shaped empires and toppled kingdoms. The air within carried the scent of aged parchment and patient wisdom. But one book drew his gaze with the pull of a lodestone. A slim psalter bound in faded crimson, its spine unmarked by title or author, humble yet somehow luminous in the filtered light. When he lifted it from its resting place, the leather felt warm beneath his touch, as though it had been sitting in summer sunshine rather than shadows. The sensation travelled up his arms like gentle electricity, and for a moment he could have sworn he felt a heartbeat within the binding itself. "Like it's been waiting," Matteo murmured, and the words felt truer than any prayer he had ever spoken. He opened the cover with the reverent care of one handling starlight, each movement deliberate and filled with wonder. Ink ghosts danced across the yellowed pages, like memories made visible, the words barely visible after countless years in darkness, yet somehow still alive with meaning. He squinted at the flowing script, not quite Latin with its familiar cadences, not quite Greek with its ancient wisdom. Something older, perhaps, something that predated the languages of Rome and Athens, or something else entirely, something that belonged to realms beyond the reach of earthly tongues. A breath of air stirred the pages with invisible fingers, though no window stood open and no door had moved. The psalter seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat, a subtle rhythm that matched the whispers he'd been hearing in the deep hours of night when the Vatican slept and dreams walked the marble corridors. The pages rustled with a sound like angel wings, and Matteo felt his soul lean forward, straining to hear secrets that had waited centuries to be spoken. "What are you trying to tell me?" he asked the silence, and his voice carried the weight of genuine wonder. The question hung in the air like incense, mixing with the dust motes and the golden light. The book offered no answer in words, but Matteo felt its importance deep in his bones, in the very marrow of his being. It settled into his awareness like a stone dropped into still water, creating ripples that would spread through all his tomorrows. Whatever force had broken the seal, whether divine hand or the patient work of time itself, wanted him to find this text, had chosen him for this moment of discovery. With reluctance that felt like leaving a warm hearth on a winter's night, he returned the psalter to its resting place among its silent companions. The book settled into its space with a soft sigh, as though acknowledging the temporary nature of their parting. He eased the cabinet door closed with the gentleness of one tucking a child into bed, and as metal met wood with the softest whisper of connection, something miraculous happened. The scent of ancient incense began to fill the air, myrrh and frankincense, cedar and spikenard, perfumes that spoke of holy nights and sacred ceremonies. The fragrance bloomed around him like an invisible garden, rich and complex, and filled with the weight of countless prayers. Matteo inhaled deeply, tasting centuries of devotion on his tongue, feeling the sacred smoke fill his lungs with the breath of ages. No censers had swung in these particular halls for generations, their silver chains long since stilled, yet the sacred smoke lingered in the very air, as if the stones themselves remembered every prayer ever whispered within these walls, every tear shed in hope, every moment of divine communion that had blessed this place with its presence. Evening crept across the papal apartments like a gentle tide, casting long shadows that stretched like dark fingers across gilded frames and marble floors worn smooth by centuries of reverent footsteps. The dying light filtered through tall windows, painting the sacred halls in hues of amber and rose. Matteo swept through these hallowed corridors with practiced care, his worn cloth passing over priceless surfaces, with the reverent attention of one who understood that every object here held whispers of the divine. The apartments breathed with history, each tapestry, each carved cherub, each golden crucifix carrying the weight of prayers offered by pontiffs long since returned to dust. The air itself seemed thick with sanctity, heavy with the accumulated devotions of ages. Matteo moved through this sacred space like a ghost among relics, his footsteps muffled by Persian carpets that had once graced the chambers of kings. A flash of colour caught his peripheral vision, a portrait he'd passed 100 times before in his quiet rounds. Yet tonight, something pulled him closer with an inexplicable magnetism. The painting hung in an alcove where the evening light pooled like spilled wine, casting everything in a warm, otherworldly glow. The woman's face emerged from oils aged to the colour of amber honey, her features sharp and luminous against a background of deepening shadows that seemed to pulse with their own life. Unlike the stern expressions of cardinals and popes adorning the nearby walls, those faces carved from marble determination and holy authority, her eyes held a gentleness that seemed to pierce the very centuries between them, reaching across time itself to touch something deep within the quiet archivist's soul. Those eyes. Matteo stepped back, his breath catching in his throat, then found himself drawn forward again as if by invisible threads. They glistened with an impossible wetness, like morning dew on rose petals, tracking his movement with the fluid grace of stars following Earth's eternal rotation through the heavens. The painted gaze held such depth, such knowing sorrow mixed with infinite compassion, that Matteo felt as though he stood before not mere pigment and canvas, but a living presence wrapped in the mystery of ages. He pressed his palm against the ancient canvas frame, feeling the wood worn smooth by countless hands, warm despite the evening chill that had begun to settle over the Vatican halls. The frame itself seemed to thrum with some subtle energy, as though the very wood remembered the touch of its creator's hands. Who were you? The question slipped from his lips before he could catch it, his voice barely more than a whisper in the sacred stillness. The words seemed to hang in the air like incense, floating between him and the painted figure who watched him with such tender intensity. Candlelight flickered across her face from sconces that burned eternal in these holy halls, their flames dancing in rhythm with some unseen breath. For a heartbeat that stretched into eternity, her lips trembled, as though fighting against the very paint itself to form words that had waited centuries to be spoken. The expression on her face shifted subtly, like clouds passing over the moon, revealing depths of emotion that no earthly artist could have captured through skill alone. A tear of light traced down her cheek, or perhaps it was merely the evening shadows playing tricks with Matteo's eyes, weaving illusions from the interplay of flame and darkness. Yet the moisture seemed real, glistening like a pearl caught in moonlight, carrying with it the weight of sorrows too deep for words and joys, too pure for earthly understanding. The air around the portrait grew thick with the phantom scent of incense, though no censers burned in this quiet corner of the apartments. The fragrance carried notes of frankincense and myrrh, ancient perfumes that spoke of sacred rituals and holy mysteries. Matteo felt his heart quicken as the atmosphere itself seemed to shimmer with invisible presence, as though the very walls held their breath in anticipation of some long-awaited revelation. His fingers brushed the nameplate beneath the frame, its brass surface tarnished with age and worn smooth by time's patient hand. The letters had been eroded by centuries of touch, leaving only tantalizing fragments that teased at the truth. Ain't of the hidden. The words seemed to pulse with significance, each missing letter a mystery in itself, each visible curve of metal holding the promise of secrets waiting to unfold. What secret do you guard? His words hung in the charged air between them, carried on breath that misted slightly in the cooling evening. The question seemed to echo not just in the alcove, but in the very stones of the Vatican itself, reverberating through hidden chambers and forgotten passages where other mysteries lay sleeping. The portrait's expression softened, almost imperceptibly, like a mother watching over a sleeping child in the depths of night. The transformation was so subtle that Matteo wondered if he imagined it, yet the change felt as real as his own heartbeat. The eyes that had followed him with such intensity now began to lower, heavy with the weight of centuries spent keeping silence, lashes dark as ravens' wings, casting gentle shadows on painted cheeks. The saint, for surely she was a saint, though her name lay hidden in time's erosion, seemed to settle into a deeper peace, as though his recognition had granted her some measure of rest. Her painted form radiated a serenity that filled the alcove like warm honey, flowing outward to embrace the quiet archivist who stood transfixed in her presence. Matteo backed away slowly, his skin prickling with awareness, despite the warmth that seemed to emanate from the portrait itself. Each step felt weighted with significance, as though he walked away not just from a painting, but from an encounter that would forever change the path of his quiet life. The very air seemed reluctant to let him go, clinging to his robes like invisible hands. At the doorway, he paused, drawn by an irresistible urge to look one final time. The saint's eyes had closed completely now, her face serene in painted sleep that spoke of peace finally found after long vigil. Her features had settled into an expression of such profound tranquility that Matteo felt his own restless spirit begin to quiet in response. Yet something about her slight smile, barely more than a whisper of expression at the corners of her mouth, suggested not an ending, but a beginning. It was the smile of one who had waited through long centuries for this moment, who had recognized in him what she had waited so very long to see. The expression carried the promise of mysteries yet to unfold, of secrets ready to reveal themselves to one whose heart had been prepared to receive them. As Matteo finally turned away, the evening shadows deepened around the portrait, wrapping the painted saint in veils of gentle darkness. But even as the light faded, her smile seemed to linger in the air like the echo of bells, a promise that their meeting was only the first note in a symphony that would soon begin to play. Moonlight pooled through Matteo's narrow window like spilled mercury, casting a silver sheen across his simple wooden desk. The ancient psalm book lay open before him, its yellowed pages whispering secrets with each careful turn. Outside, Rome slumbered beneath the gentle watch of stars, while within these humble walls, mysteries stirred like embers waiting to catch flame. His fingers traced the worn leather binding with the reverence of a pilgrim touching holy ground, pausing at an unusual ridge near the spine. The leather here felt different from the rest, warmer somehow, as though it held the memory of countless hands that had sought the same hidden truth. "What have you hidden from the world?" His voice barely disturbed the midnight silence, soft as a prayer carried on evening wind. The binding felt subtly raised beneath his touch, with an odd give that spoke of deliberate craftsmanship. Years of handling ancient texts in the Vatican's deepest archives had taught Matteo to listen to what books whispered through texture and weight. He lifted the psalm book closer to his flickering candle, its golden light dancing across pages that had witnessed centuries of devotion. The wax dripped slowly, marking time like a monastery bell as Matteo pressed gently along the mysterious ridge. His thumb found a particular spot where the leather seemed to breathe beneath his touch. Something clicked. A sound soft as a sigh, quiet as a confession. A seam split the leather with the precision of divine design, revealing a hollow space carved into the spine with surgical care. The cavity was lined with silk that had somehow remained pristine through the passing years, as though time itself had chosen to spare this sacred hiding place. Something metallic glinted in the candlelight like a captured star. Matteo's breath caught in his throat as he extracted a key, its silver surface untarnished by the weight of centuries. The metal felt warm against his palm, almost alive, pulsing with an energy that seemed to echo his own heartbeat. Intricate patterns adorned the key's shaft, delicate curves that might have been angels' wings taking flight, or perhaps flames reaching toward a heaven. The craftsmanship spoke of hands guided by more than earthly skill, each line etched with purpose beyond mere decoration. The first of three. The whisper filled his humble chamber like incense rising to rafters, clear as temple bells calling the faithful to prayer. This time, the voice seemed to emanate from everywhere at once. The stone walls that had sheltered pilgrims, the wooden floor worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, the very air itself thick with anticipation. Matteo nearly dropped the precious key, his hands trembling as though he held lightning itself. The whisper carried no threat, only promise, the kind that made hearts race with wonder rather than fear. It was a voice that knew his name before he was born, that had waited patiently through countless nights for this moment of discovery. His fingers steadied as he examined the key more closely, turning it in the candlelight like a scholar studying sacred text. Symbols he didn't recognize wrapped around its bow in spiraling patterns that seemed to shift and dance in the flickering flame. Some resembled ancient Hebrew, others might have been Aramaic, but many belonged to no earthly language he had ever encountered in his years among the Vatican's treasures. The blade bore teeth unlike any lock he'd encountered in the deepest archives, their shape suggesting mechanisms beyond conventional understanding. This was no ordinary key forged for no ordinary door. It was a thing of purpose, designed to open pathways that existed between the seen and unseen worlds. The candle flickered without warning, though no draught stirred the air within his sealed chamber. The flame bent as though bowing before some invisible presence, casting wild shadows that reached across the walls like grasping fingers. Matteo looked up slowly, his prepared words freezing in his throat like morning frost. Across the far wall, Shadows began to dance and merge with deliberate intent, taking shape like unfurling wings of some celestial guardian. They stretched from floor to ceiling with majestic span, as if some seraph stood watch over his discovery, blessing it with divine approval. The darkness moved with grace rather than menace, protective rather than threatening. The wing-like shadows pulsed with their own rhythm, synchronized with something deeper than earthly time. They seemed to whisper without sound, communicating in the language that predated words, the tongue of pure understanding that spoke directly to the soul. With hands that shook like autumn leaves, Matteo placed the silver key on his simple bedside table, with the care reserved for the most sacred relics. The metal caught the candlelight and threw its own strange patterns across the ceiling, geometric forms that resembled star charts or perhaps the blueprints of heaven itself. 3 keys, the whisper had promised with gentle certainty. This luminous treasure was only the beginning of a journey that would lead through mysteries older than Rome itself. Somewhere in the vast labyrinth of the Vatican, 2 more keys waited to be discovered, each one bringing him closer to a truth that had slumbered for centuries. The wing shadows pulsed once more with benedictory grace before fading back into ordinary darkness, leaving only the memory of their presence like the warmth that lingers after prayer. But Matteo knew with absolute certainty that nothing would ever be ordinary again. He had stepped onto a path illuminated by more than candlelight, a way that led somewhere ancient and holy, somewhere he both yearned and feared to go. The silver key rested on his table like a fallen star, patient and eternal, waiting for tomorrow's light to reveal the next chapter of its sacred story. Dew sparkled on grass blades like scattered diamonds as Matteo made his way through the Vatican gardens in the hushed moments before dawn. The eastern sky bloomed in watercolor strokes of rose and amber, painting the ancient walls in gentle fire, but his attention remained fixed on the silver key warming in his palm. Its surface held the night's coolness, yet something deeper pulsed within the metal, a rhythm that matched his heartbeat. His feet carried him past sculpted hedges and sleeping fountains, toward an ancient wall thick with ivy that cascaded like nature's own tapestry. The morning air hung still and expectant, carrying the faint perfume of night-blooming jasmine and the distant echo of monastery bells greeting the new day. The stone whispered to him, or perhaps it was that other voice, the one that had called to him through marble halls and candle-lit corridors, drawing him ever closer to this moment. Matteo brushed aside the cascading vines with reverent fingers, revealing weathered blocks that had stood sentinel for centuries. Each stone bore the gentle wear of countless seasons, their surfaces smooth as prayer beads worn by devoted hands. His fingers found a groove, not natural, but carved with deliberate purpose by some long-forgotten craftsman. The keyhole seemed to pulse with its own inner light as he approached. The key slipped in, as though it had waited through all the turning years for this very moment, for these particular hands to guide it home. Metal scraped against metal in a whisper of ancient mechanisms awakening. The door swung inward without a sound, revealing worn stone steps that spiraled down into welcoming darkness. The air that rose to meet him carried the crisp scent of mountain springs and aged stone, tinged with something indefinable, perhaps the breath of angels, or the silence between prayers. "Hello?" His whisper scattered into the shadows like seeds on fertile ground, seeking purchase in the depths below. No answer came, yet somehow the silence felt full rather than empty. The steps led him deeper, each footfall echoing off walls that seemed to lean in with gentle curiosity. The darkness should have been complete this far beneath the earth, but a warm glow beckoned from below, like a lighthouse calling ships to harbour. Matteo emerged into a chapel no larger than his modest bedroom, yet it felt vast as the greatest cathedral ever built. The space breathed with an ancient peace that settled into his bones and quieted the restless corners of his mind. Candles lined a simple stone altar, their flames perfectly still as though frozen in eternal devotion. No wax had melted down their sides, no smoke curled upward to stain the ceiling. They burned with a light that seemed to come from somewhere beyond the physical world. The illumination they cast painted the walls in shades of honey and gold, revealing frescoes of stars and angels nearly faded to whispers. Images so delicate they might have been painted by moonbeams themselves. Who lit these? Matteo reached out and touched one of the flames with trembling fingers. It neither burned nor flickered, feeling more like warm silk than fire. How long have you waited here? A note hung in the air, not quite sound, not quite silence, but something that existed in the space between heartbeats. It resonated in his bones, calling to something deeper than thought, older than memory. The melody seemed to rise from the very stones, as though the chapel remembered every prayer ever whispered within its walls. Matteo sank to his knees on the cool floor, his hands folding naturally in his lap. The humming grew stronger, weaving around him like an invisible embrace. It was as though the chapel itself sang a hymn too ancient and pure for human ears to fully comprehend, a song that spoke directly to the soul. Through a hidden shaft in the ceiling, dawn's first true rays pierced the underground sanctuary like fingers of divine light. They caught the candlelight and scattered it in all directions, transforming the humble space into a constellation of earthbound stars. Golden motes danced in the blessed air, each speck of dust made sacred by the light it carried. Matteo bowed his head, overcome by a wonder so profound it brought tears to his eyes. Here, in this pocket of sacred silence, buried beneath the bustling world, time seemed to pause its endless march and consider the beauty of a single, perfect moment. Above him, Rome awakened to another morning of commerce and conversation, of bells and footsteps, and the thousand small sounds of human life continuing its ancient rhythm. But below, in this hidden chapel, where candles burned with eternal flame and angels watched from fading frescoes, eternity held its breath and waited. And in that waiting, Matteo found a peace he had never known existed, a silence so complete it contained every prayer ever uttered, every hope ever cherished, every dream ever born in the human heart. The iron hinges protested with a low, mournful groan as Matteo eased the chapel door wider, each reluctant movement echoing through the sacred silence. Cool, ancient air rushed past him like the breath of sleeping centuries, carrying the musty perfume of forgotten prayers and dust that had settled undisturbed since the time of emperors. The tunnel beyond gaped like an open throat, its darkness so complete it seemed to swallow light itself, descending into the very bones beneath the Vatican's foundations. His footsteps echoed off bare stone as he ventured forward, each careful step creating a whispered conversation between his feet and the ancient floor. The passage narrowed gradually, walls pressing closer with each stride until his shoulders nearly brushed both sides. The stone worn smooth by hands that had touched these walls when Rome was young. The air grew thicker here, heavy with the weight of secrets, that had slumbered in darkness for generations beyond counting. Memories surfaced of whispered tales shared among the archivists during quiet evenings in the manuscript rooms, stories of these tunnels carved deep beneath Rome's Sacred Heart, when faith was new and miracles walked the earth. The older men spoke of them only in hushed tones, crossing themselves as they shared what their masters had told them in confidence. The angels needed sanctuary, old Giuseppe once told him, his weathered voice trembling like autumn leaves. So they carved these halls with wings of light, far from mortal eyes that could not bear such radiance. They say the very stones remember their touch, glowing still in the deepest night. The corridor split into 3 branches, each path yawning open like the mouths of sleeping giants. Matteo paused, holding his lamp higher until the flame danced wildly in the stirring air. Each path twisted away into shadow, identical in their mystery, yet somehow different. The left seemed to exhale cold breath. The center hummed with an almost inaudible song, and the right whispered promises in languages he had never learned. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness beyond, keeping time like a forgotten clock that had marked the hours since the world was young. Carved symbols marked the wall beside him, weathered crosses worn smooth by countless fingers, 7-pointed stars that seemed to catch and hold his lamplight, words in languages dead for millennia, yet somehow still alive in the stone. His fingers traced their edges with reverence, feeling the weight of countless prayers worn into the rock by pilgrims who had walked these paths when the Vatican above was nothing but a hill covered in wildflowers. Which way? The whisper floated past, softer than his breath, gentler than the sigh of wind through empty corridors. It seemed to come from all directions at once, as if the very walls themselves were offering guidance to the lost and weary. A torch waited in an iron bracket, its metal green with age, yet somehow unmarked by rust. Matteo lifted it down, surprised by its solid weight and the way it seemed to fit his hand as if crafted for this very moment. The head still held traces of oil-soaked cloth, the scent of ancient olive oil rising to meet his nostrils like an offering from centuries past. He touched his lamp's flame to it with trembling fingers, and light bloomed gold against the walls, revealing frescoes so faded they seemed like dreams, painted in shadow and dust. The central passage drew him forward with an invisible current, something calling from its depths that spoke not to his ears, but to his very soul. He felt it in his bones, in the air that pressed against his skin like a living thing, warm and welcoming despite the cold stone that surrounded him. Dust motes danced in his torch beam, swirling like stars fallen to earth, each particle catching the light as if it held its own small flame. Matteo squared his shoulders, whispered a brief prayer to whatever saints watched over seekers and scholars, and stepped into the rightmost tunnel. The darkness swallowed him, save for his growing circle of torchlight that pushed back the shadows with gentle determination. Above, the weight of Rome's holiest ground pressed down like a benediction, while ahead, mysteries older than stone itself beckoned him deeper into the heart of forgotten wonders. The passage opened into a circular chamber where stale air hung motionless, undisturbed for centuries. The very atmosphere seemed to hold its breath, as if the stones themselves remembered the last footsteps that had echoed here in ages past. Matteo's torch cast dancing shadows across weathered stone walls, etched with faded Latin inscriptions. each carved letter worn smooth by time's patient touch. The flame's amber light revealed alcoves carved into the walls, empty now, but somehow expectant, waiting. In the center of this forgotten sanctuary, a marble pedestal rose from the uneven floor like a pale finger pointing skyward. The stone was veined with threads of gold that caught the torchlight, creating patterns that seemed to shift and breathe in the flickering illumination. Ancient symbols were carved around its base, not Latin this time, but something older, something that whispered of mysteries beyond the reach of ordinary understanding. The scroll resting atop the pedestal bore the marks of flame, its edges blackened and curled inward like autumn leaves touched by frost. Yet something about it caught the torchlight differently than mere parchment should. The charred surface seemed to pulse with its own inner radiance, a soft golden glow that ebbed and flowed like a sleeping heartbeat. Where other manuscripts would have crumbled to ash, this one remained whole, protected by something beyond the natural world. "Impossible," Matteo whispered, his voice scattering across the chamber like a prayer carried on wings. The words seemed to hang in the air, joining the countless other whispers that had been spoken in this sacred space over the centuries. Matteo set his torch in a wall sconce carved in the shape of an angel's outstretched hand. The flame settled into a steady glow, casting warm light that seemed to embrace rather than intrude upon the chamber's ancient peace. He approached the pedestal with the careful reverence of one who understood he walked on holy ground, each footstep deliberate and hushed. His fingers trembled as they hovered over the scroll, hesitating at the threshold between wonder and revelation. The air grew thick around him, charged with anticipation that made his skin tingle and his breath catch in his throat. There was a presence here, not threatening, but watchful, as if unseen guardians waited to see if he was worthy of what lay before him. When his skin finally made contact with the ancient parchment, a sound unlike anything he'd heard before filled the chamber. It was not music exactly, but pure tones that bypassed his ears entirely and resonated directly in his chest, in his bones, in the very marrow of his being. The sound was alive, breathing with its own rhythm, harmonizing with the steady beat of his heart until he could no longer tell where the scroll's song ended and his own pulse began. The scroll's surface was cool despite its apparent burning, smooth as silk beneath his trembling fingertips. As he carefully unrolled a section, mindful of every crease and fold, letters shimmered and danced before his eyes like living flames. They were unlike any text he'd studied in the archives. Each character seemed alive, moving with liquid grace across the page, forming words that shifted between languages he recognized and scripts that belonged to no earthly tongue. "The Gospel of Light," he breathed, the words escaping his lips like a prayer he'd carried unknowingly for years. The scroll's song grew louder at his touch, harmonizing with his voice in perfect resonance, creating melodies that seemed to echo from the very foundations of creation. This was what the whispers had led him to find, not merely a manuscript that contained holy words, but one that embodied them, that was itself a living testament to the divine. A line caught his eye, the letters blazing with sudden clarity. "In the beginning was light, and the light sang creation into being, and the song continues still in those who listen with hearts of silence." The rest was too damaged to read clearly, the ancient parchment bearing scars from whatever fire had touched it centuries ago. Yet the fragment alone made his soul ache with its beauty, filling him with a profound longing he couldn't name. Each word carried weight beyond meaning, resonating in chambers of his spirit he'd never known existed. With reverent care that bordered on worship, Matteo slowly rolled the scroll closed, his movements deliberate and gentle. The singing faded to a whisper, then to a gentle hum that seemed to emanate not just from the parchment, but from the very stones around him. As he cradled the scroll against his chest, he felt its subtle warmth through his robes. Not the heat of fire, but the gentle radiance of starlight made manifest. Darkness pressed in around him as the torch began to dim, but it felt different now. Not threatening or oppressive, but protective and embracing. Like a blanket of stars wrapping him in sacred silence, like the tender darkness that cradles a sleeping child. The scroll's soft glow remained steady against his heart as he stood motionless in the ancient chamber, understanding at last that he was no longer merely an archivist, but a guardian now of a light that had waited centuries to be found. Centuries to find the one who would carry its song into the world above. Matteo's eyes adjusted gradually to the bright sunlight as he emerged from the underground passages, blinking against the golden wash of morning light that spilled across the Vatican courtyard. His fingers still tingled from touching the glowing scroll in the depths below, its otherworldly warmth lingering like the memory of a fever dream that refuses to fade. The sensation traveled up his arms in gentle waves, as though the ancient words had left their mark upon his very soul. The courtyard stretched empty and serene before him, cobblestones gleaming like scattered jewels from the morning dew that clung to every surface. The air carried the hushed quality of early dawn, when the world holds its breath between night and day. Each footstep echoed softly against the ancient stones, a gentle rhythm that seemed to harmonize with the distant bells of Rome awakening. The statue of St. Peter loomed ahead, its bronze form casting a long shadow across the courtyard in the slanting light. The bronze foot wore smooth as polished glass from centuries of pilgrim kisses, countless faithful souls who had come seeking blessing, comfort, or simply the touch of something holy. Matteo paused before the towering figure, his gaze traveling upward to study the stern yet compassionate face that gazed out over the eternal city with eyes that had witnessed empires rise and fall. A crack in the base caught his attention, thin as a spider's thread, but somehow unnatural against the solid stone that had stood unmoved for generations. It traced a hairline path around the statue's foundation, so subtle that only eyes attuned to hidden things might notice its presence. "What secrets do you keep, old friend?" Matteo whispered, his voice barely disturbing the morning stillness. His palm pressed against the cool bronze surface, feeling the weight of history beneath his fingertips. The stone shifted beneath his touch, with the whisper of ancient mechanisms stirring to life. A section of the base rotated inward on hidden hinges, revealing a hollow space no larger than his fist, carved with the precision of master craftsmen who had worked in shadow and silence. The compartment exhaled the scent of old incense and forgotten prayers, as though it had held its breath for centuries, waiting for this moment. Inside, wrapped in silk that crumbled to silver dust at his touch, lay a golden key that seemed to capture and hold the morning light. Unlike the silver one from the psalm book, this key bore intricate engravings along its shaft, delicate scrollwork that told stories in metal, each curve and line placed with deliberate care by hands that understood the weight of sacred purpose. Matteo lifted the key with reverent fingers, tracing the Latin words engraved in flowing script. "Only love opens the way." The ancient phrase seemed to pulse with meaning beyond its simple letters, speaking of mysteries that could not be unlocked by force or cleverness, but only by the gentle turning of a heart opened to wonder. The metal warmed against his skin as though awakening from a long, dreamless sleep, responding to his touch, like a living thing that recognized its keeper. He slipped it carefully into his pocket next to the charred scroll, feeling the weight of both treasures against his side, one born of flame and mystery, the other of bronze and patient waiting. With gentle hands, he closed the hidden compartment in the statue's base, sealing the secret once more. A shadow passed overhead, drawing his gaze upward to the vast Roman sky, where clouds drifted like ancient ships navigating celestial seas. They seemed to form and reform in the gentle breeze. First angels with outstretched wings, then hands reaching down toward earth with fingers of vapor and light, then faces that smiled with the patience of eternity. The wind carried the sweet smoke of incense from morning mass, mixing with the dust of centuries that still clung to his clothes like the embrace of ages past. The second key, he whispered to himself, the words joining the symphony of morning sounds that filled the courtyard. The mysterious voice from the underground chamber echoed in his memory like a half-remembered song. Some say the labyrinth was built to hide angels. Now, with two keys resting against his heart, he wondered if those whispered stories held more truth than legend, if the very stones of Rome kept secrets that only the faithful could unlock. He touched the statue's foot one last time, a gentle gesture of gratitude that felt like a prayer spoken without words. Above him, the clouds continued their slow, eternal dance across the Roman sky, as though heaven itself watched his discovery with patient grace, blessing each step of his journey into mystery with the quiet approval of the divine. Shadows pooled like dark velvet in the forgotten corners of the chapel as Matteo traced his fingertips along ancient stone walls, each carved surface worn smooth by countless hands that had sought comfort in their silent embrace. Dust motes danced in the last golden rays of sunlight filtering through a high window, painting ethereal paths across worn floor tiles that had witnessed centuries of prayer and pilgrimage. The air hung thick with the weight of ages, carrying whispers of frankincense and myrrh that seemed to seep from the very stones themselves. Matteo moved with reverent slowness, his footsteps barely disturbing the sacred hush that blanketed this place like a shroud of peace. The first notes floated through the air like wisps of incense, so soft at first that he wondered if they were born from his own imagination. A pure soprano lifted skyward, its voice clear as mountain streams, joined by an alto's warm embrace that wrapped around the melody like arms of comfort. More voices began to weave into the growing tapestry of sound, tenor bright as sunrise, bass deep as ocean depths, each perfect and clear as crystal formed in heaven's foundries. "Hello?" His whisper disappeared into the melody like a prayer cast into wind. The empty wooden pews held nothing but gathering twilight and the faint outlines of cushions worn thin by generations of the faithful. No robed figures stood in the carved choir stalls that lined the chancel. No footsteps echoed on the stone floor that stretched before him like a sea of silence. Yet the song swelled with impossible beauty, filling every corner with light and longing that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. The ancient stones seemed to pulse with each crescendo, as if the very foundations breathed with the rhythm of the music. Matteo pressed his palm flat against the cool stone, feeling its surface thrum beneath his touch. Through his skin, centuries of prayers vibrated, countless voices that had risen in praise within these walls, their echoes trapped and treasured within the very mortar that bound the chapel together. "The stones remember," he breathed, his voice barely audible above the celestial chorus. Latin verses soared to the vaulted ceiling, their words painting images of peace, of grace, of glory that transcended earthly understanding. "Te Deum laudamus," the voices sang, praising in harmonies that seemed to unlock chambers in his heart he never knew existed. Matteo closed his eyes, letting the music wash over him like baptismal waters. Each note rang pure as spring water drawn from sacred wells, clean as morning light breaking over the 7 hills of Rome. The harmony shifted like clouds across heaven's dome, growing softer, more intimate. Individual voices began to fade like stars surrendering to dawn's gentle touch. The soprano held one final, shimmering note that seemed to pierce straight through to his soul, carrying with it all the hopes and dreams of every heart that had ever sought solace in this place. Then silence fell, gentle as snow covering the eternal city in winter's embrace. Matteo bowed his head, tears tracking silently down his cheeks like silver streams marking paths of wonder. The peace that filled him was almost too much to bear, as if he'd glimpsed something holy, something that existed beyond the boundaries of time and flesh, beyond the limitations of mortal understanding. His chest rose and fell with breath that felt sanctified by what he had witnessed. The chapel settled back into its patient stillness, shadows lengthening as the last light faded from the high window. But the stones hummed faintly beneath his trembling fingers, keeping their ancient memories safe like treasures locked in heaven's vault, waiting until the next time they chose to share their sacred songs with a soul ready to listen. In that moment, Matteo understood that he had become witness to something eternal. The voices of all who had ever loved this place, their devotion made manifest in stone and song. Midnight crept through the Vatican's silent halls like a gentle tide, carrying with it the weight of centuries and the breath of sleeping prayers. Matteo moved through the shadows with reverent steps, his footfalls barely disturbing the sacred stillness that wrapped around the ancient stones like a protective embrace. In the forgotten chamber beneath the gardens, his hands trembled, not from fear, but from the profound sense that he stood at the threshold of something vast and luminous. Match after match flickered to life between his fingers, each tiny flame a small act of faith in the encompassing darkness. He lit candles in a careful circular pattern around the domed chamber, placing each one with the deliberate care of a monk arranging altar pieces. Each flame cast dancing shadows that climbed the curved walls like ascending spirits, reaching toward the vaulted ceiling above. The shadows seemed to whisper secrets to one another as they swayed, carrying the soft murmur of candlelight across stone that had witnessed untold mysteries. His neck ached as he studied the intricate star map painted overhead, tilting his head back until the weight of wonder filled his chest. Constellations spread across the weathered plaster in faded gold leaf that caught the candlelight like captured starshine. Orion's belt stretching across an imagined winter sky, Cassiopeia's chair tilted in eternal dignity, the Great Bear's slow and endless march around the celestial pole. The ancient artist, whoever they had been, had captured each celestial body in its proper place with such precision that Matteo felt he was gazing through a window into the very heavens themselves. These alignments. His voice emerged as barely more than a breath, reverent and wondering. Matteo pulled a worn star chart from his leather satchel, its edges soft with age and countless consultations. He compared it to the ceiling with the methodical care of a scholar seeking truth. They match exactly. Every star, every constellation, as if painted from life. The realization sent a gentle shiver through him. Someone, centuries ago, had stood in this very spot and looked up at the night sky with such devotion that they had recreated it here, transforming cold stone into a mirror of the infinite. A soft glow caught his eye, drawing his attention like a moth to flame. Among the painted stars, one point of light shined brighter than the rest, pulsing with its own inner fire that seemed to breathe with the rhythm of some cosmic heartbeat. The light was warm and golden, unlike the reflected gleam of the other stars, and it called to something deep within his chest. He checked his star chart again, running his finger along the familiar patterns, his brow furrowed in gentle confusion. The methodical astronomer in him traced each constellation, mapped each stellar position, searched for some earthly explanation. "That's impossible," he whispered to the listening stones. "There's no star in that position. No star has ever shone there. Follow the light." The whisper curled through the chamber like incense smoke, soft and insistent, carrying with it the weight of infinite patience. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, from the stones themselves, from the painted stars, from the very air that held his breath. Matteo spun slowly in place, his movement careful and reverent, searching for the source of that gentle voice. But only the painted stars watched him with their ancient eyes, that single point still gleaming with impossible radiance, like a beacon calling across vast distances of time and space. The candlelight danced around him as he moved, casting his shadow in a dozen different directions, each one reaching toward the walls as if seeking answers written in the stone. But the voice had spoken and fallen silent, leaving only the patient glow of that inexplicable star and the soft whisper of flame against wax. His fingers shook, not with fear, but with the profound weight of mystery, as he began to pinch out each candle, working his way around the circle with deliberate care. Darkness crept in with each extinguished flame, gentle and encompassing, until only that strange star remained overhead. Somehow, impossibly, its light grew stronger in the gloom, as if darkness itself served to reveal its true nature. The chamber filled with that singular radiance, soft and golden, transforming the ancient stone into something that felt less like a room and more like a cathedral of light. Matteo stood in its glow, feeling small and blessed, chosen and humble all at once. He stumbled out into the courtyard, his legs unsteady not from exhaustion, but from the profound shift in his understanding of what was possible. The cool night air filled his lungs like a blessing, clean and sharp, after the close warmth of the chamber. Around him, the Vatican slept in peaceful silence, its ancient walls holding their secrets close. Above him stretched the real night sky, a vast tapestry of distant suns scattered across the darkness like diamonds cast upon black velvet. Each star burned with its own cold fire, distant and eternal, witnesses to the turning of ages and the prayers of countless souls. His eyes tracked automatically to where that phantom star had glowed on the ceiling, following an instinct deeper than thought. There, hanging directly above the Vatican dome like a shepherd's star, it burned in reality. A star that shouldn't exist according to every chart and catalogue, yet shone with undeniable presence. Its light seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat, a gentle rhythm that spoke of connection and purpose, beckoning him onward to whatever mystery waited next in the unfolding of this sacred journey. The star was neither cold nor distant like its celestial siblings, but warm and welcoming, as if it had been placed there for him alone to find. "What are you trying to show me?" he whispered to the night, his words carried upward on the gentle breeze that stirred the garden leaves. Only silence answered. But it was not an empty silence. It was full of patience and promise, heavy with the weight of revelation yet to come. The star continued its gentle vigil, marking a place in the heavens that defied all earthly maps and charts, a beacon of mystery that transformed the familiar sky into something alive with wonder and possibility. Dawn crept across the circular chamber like a gentle benediction, casting rainbow light through the ancient stained glass windows that had watched over secrets for countless centuries. Each pane told its own story in jeweled hues, sapphire blues that whispered of midnight prayers, emerald greens that spoke of gardens where saints once walked, and ruby reds that glowed with the warmth of eternal flame. Matteo hadn't moved since midnight, his neck stiff from hours of studying the mysterious star above, his body curved like a question mark as he gazed upward in wonder and bewilderment. The painted constellations on the vaulted ceiling began to fade as morning touched them with tender fingers, their celestial dance growing pale in daylight's embrace. All except for that impossible point of light, that singular star that defied every law of art and nature, which continued to pulse with inner radiance, as if it carried the heartbeat of heaven itself within its painted form. His weathered fingers traced the worn edges of his star chart, the parchment soft as silk from decades of devoted study. 20 years in the Vatican archives had taught him to trust in facts, in what could be catalogued and proven, filed away in neat rows like soldiers of knowledge. He had built his life on certainties, the weight of ancient books, the smell of aging ink, the quiet rustle of turning pages. Yet here was something that defied every explanation his scholarly mind could offer. A star that shouldn't exist, glowing as if it breathed with the very essence of mystery. The air around him began to shift, carrying a warmth that had nothing to do with the rising sun streaming through the colored glass. It was the kind of warmth that came from within, from places deeper than flesh and bone. A presence filled the sacred space, gentle as a mother's touch upon a fevered brow, wise as the ancient stones that had held up cathedrals for 1,000 years. The feeling wrapped around his weary shoulders like a cloak woven from peace itself, settling into his bones with the weight of blessing. From somewhere deep within his chest, a whisper rose like incense, clear as temple bells carried on morning wind. If this journey speaks to you, you may wish to return to these mysteries again. The words formed not in his mind, but in the very center of his being, as if his heart had learned to speak in a language older than Latin. "I don't understand," Matteo whispered back, his voice barely disturbing the hallowed silence as he touched his chest where the words had bloomed like flowers. "What am I meant to find? What door am I meant to open?" His questions hung in the air like prayers waiting for answers, like candles lit in hope. Sunlight streamed stronger through the windows now, painting the stone floor in jeweled patterns that seemed to dance and breathe. The colors swirled around his feet in spirals of gold and amber, crimson and violet, as if the light itself had come alive to guide his steps along paths he couldn't yet see. He gathered his charts and notes with trembling hands, fingers that had grown steady through years of careful work, now shaking with the magnitude of what he'd witnessed. Each parchment was tucked away with the reverence of one handling sacred relics. The mysterious star above gave one final pulse, a farewell that felt like a promise, before fading back into the fresco's painted surface. But Matteo knew with the certainty of faith that it wasn't truly gone. It waited there, patient as the centuries themselves, as constant as the prayers that had echoed through these halls, for him to continue his search and unlock the next chapter of this unfolding mystery. He crossed the chamber floor with deliberate steps, each footfall steadier than the last, as if the presence that filled the room was teaching his feet to walk in rhythm with something greater than himself. The companion feeling stayed with him, a warmth in his chest that spoke of protection and purpose, of being chosen for something beautiful and terrible and necessary. At the doorway, he paused to look back one final time, his eyes drinking in the sight of rainbow light dancing across ancient stone. The circular room felt different now, transformed by mourning and mystery, less like a place of questions and more like a sanctuary of promise, a chapel where answers came not in words, but in the quiet knowing that settles in faithful hearts. Bronze bells began to toll across Vatican City, their deep voices rolling through stone corridors like the breath of sleeping giants. The sound wrapped around him as he stepped into the hallway, each toll a heartbeat marking time in this sacred place where eternity touched the mortal world. Matteo closed the heavy wooden door behind him with gentle reverence, feeling the cool metal of the second key resting against his chest like a secret kept close to his heart. Peace settled into his bones as he walked away through corridors that had known the footsteps of saints and sinners alike, knowing with quiet certainty that he would return when the stars aligned once more, when the next door was ready to open, when the mystery called him back to continue this journey that was reshaping his very soul. Sunlight slanted through dusty windows in golden threads, each beam carrying motes of ancient dust that danced like tiny prayers in the still air. Matteo pulled another leather-bound register from the shelf, his movements slow and reverent in the cathedral-like silence of the archive. His back ached from hours bent over the ancient volumes, vertebrae protesting the weight of centuries he carried in his careful posture. Each breath drew in the musty perfume of aging paper, parchment, and binding glue, the very essence of preserved time. The afternoon light painted copper and amber streaks across endless rows of spines that hadn't known human touch in centuries. Some volumes leaned against each other like old friends sharing secrets, their leather covers worn smooth by the passage of decades. Others stood solitary, wrapped in the profound stillness that only comes with being truly forgotten. Matteo's fingers traced the embossed letters on the spine before him, feeling the raised gold that had dulled to the color of old honey. When he opened the register, it fell naturally to a page somewhere in the middle, as if the book itself knew what he needed to find. There, nestled between entries for Pope Leo III and Stephen V, lay a curious gap in the records, a space where the pagination jumped from 247 to 251, as if someone had lived and ruled and died between them, then vanished from memory like morning mist. His pulse quickened as his fingers discovered a loose page tucked deep into the binding's groove, almost hidden against the sewn threads. The parchment felt different beneath his touch, softer, more personal than the official records surrounding it. The handwriting flowed in delicate strokes across the yellowed surface, each letter formed with the careful precision of someone who knew these words would outlive him. The ink remained startlingly black despite its obvious age, as if time itself had chosen to preserve this message. "To the one who will hear the whispers," it began, and Matteo's breath caught in his throat. "I write these words in the depths of night, knowing they are meant for eyes not yet born, for hands not yet formed in their mother's womb." The words seemed to shimmer on the page as Matteo read on, his heart beating faster with each line. "He will come in a time when faith grows quiet in the hearts of men, when the stars align perfectly in the painted sky of the hidden chapel. The archivist will walk our sacred halls with humble steps and lowered eyes, seeking not power or glory, but only truth in its purest form. His heart will know the way when others have forgotten the path entirely." Matteo's throat tightened, and he had to pause, blinking away the sudden moisture that blurred his vision. The page described a man who would find 3 keys hidden in sacred places, who would discover a burning candle in a sealed room where no flame should exist, who would hear the voices of angels in empty chapels echoing with centuries of prayer. "He will carry the weight of silence in his soul like a precious burden," the words continued, and Matteo felt each phrase settle into his bones like recognition. "His steps will be quiet upon the ancient stones. His voice will be gentle among the sacred texts, and his wonder will be pure as mountain snow. When he reads these words, and he will read them on an afternoon when the light falls just so, let him know that his path was written in heaven's own script, long before his first breath stirred his infant lungs." The signature at the bottom had been deliberately scratched out with careful, methodical strokes, as if someone had taken great care to ensure the name would never be read. But beside the obliterated words, a small sketch remained untouched. The same mysterious star that glowed impossibly on the chapel ceiling, drawn with the same loving precision as the text above. A draft stirred the pages, though Matteo knew no window stood open in this deep archive. The register closed softly, as if guided by unseen hands that moved with infinite gentleness. The sound was barely a whisper, leather meeting leather in the sacred silence. Matteo sat back in his chair, his fingers trembling against the worn leather cover. The afternoon light seemed different now, charged with meaning and purpose, as if every golden beam carried messages from centuries past. He felt the weight of countless years pressing down upon his shoulders, not oppressive but comforting, like the embrace of countless faithful souls who had walked these halls before him. Through the stone walls, he could sense the vastness of the Vatican around him, the great dome rising toward heaven, the countless chambers filled with treasures and secrets, the gardens where saints had walked and pondered divine mysteries. All of it suddenly felt connected to this moment, to this letter, to the trembling understanding that every choice he'd made had been part of a vast, beautiful tapestry woven by hands he would never see. Outside, bells began to toll across the Vatican gardens, their bronze voices rolling like gentle thunder through the afternoon air. But Matteo barely heard them, lost as he was in the profound understanding that every step he'd taken, every breath he'd drawn, every quiet moment of wonder in these sacred halls had been part of a story written centuries before his birth, a story that was somehow, impossibly, all about him. Stars glimmered through narrow windows high above, as Matteo descended the worn stone steps into the crypt of saints, each footfall echoing softly in the hallowed silence. The air grew cooler with each step downward, carrying the faint scent of aged stone and lingering incense from centuries of prayer. Shadows pooled in the corners like gathered darkness, broken only by the flickering light of wall-mounted torches that cast dancing patterns across marble faces frozen in eternal repose. So many secrets held in stone, he whispered, his voice barely disturbing the sacred quiet. The words echoed off the vaulted ceiling, multiplying into a chorus of whispers that seemed to awaken the very walls around him. The path led him deeper into the heart of the crypt, past alcoves housing the remains of holy men and women who had walked these halls in life. Their stone effigies gazed upward with sightless eyes that seemed to follow ancient prayers toward heaven, hands clasped in perpetual devotion. Some bore the worn features of bishops and cardinals, others the gentle faces of nuns and monks who had devoted their lives to silent service. The torchlight played across their carved robes, making the stone seem to breathe with remembered faith. At the far end of the chamber, where the shadows grew deepest, a solitary angel stood guard, its wings spread wide like a protective embrace, face tilted down in eternal vigil over the sacred space. The craftsmanship was exquisite, each feather carved with delicate precision, each fold of the celestial robes flowing like captured wind. This was no ordinary guardian. This was a masterpiece born of devotion and divine inspiration. Matteo froze as he drew closer, his breath catching in his throat. Water trickled down the angel's face, impossible tears flowing from carved eyes that should have been dry as desert stone. The droplets traced crystalline paths across marble cheeks, each one catching the torchlight like tiny stars. They gathered like morning dew on stone lips before falling to the floor below with the softest whisper of sound. The sight filled him with wonder and reverence. How could stone weep? What sorrow or joy moved through this celestial guardian that even marble could not contain its emotion? The angel's outstretched hands cradled something that caught the torchlight and held it like captured flame. A bronze key, green with the patina of countless years. Ancient symbols decorated its shaft, worn smooth by time yet still legible to those who knew how to read the language of faith. Along the bow, words emerged through centuries of tarnish, letters that seemed to glow with their own inner light. The song opens the vault. The third key, he breathed, the words catching in his throat like a prayer half-spoken. His heart quickened as he recognized the significance of this moment. 3 keys he had sought, and here before him lay the final piece of the divine puzzle. He reached toward the key with trembling fingers, hesitant to disturb the angel's vigil. The marble tears fell faster now, creating a gentle melody as they struck the stone floor, drop by drop, note by note. The sound filled the crypt with haunting music, a song of loss and longing, of secrets kept too long in darkness, of truths waiting to be born into light. The melody seemed to echo from the very bones of the saints around him, as if they too sang in harmonies only the faithful could hear. His fingertips brushed the cold metal, and warmth spread through his hand like benediction. The key came free easily, as if the angel had been waiting through all these centuries to offer this gift to the right seeker. Its weight settled in his palm, heavy with purpose and promise, thrumming with an energy that seemed almost alive. The marble tears slowed their gentle cascade, then stopped entirely. Silence descended once more over the crypt of saints. But it was not the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of completion, of a sacred duty fulfilled. Matteo looked up into the angel's face and found it peaceful now, almost smiling. The torchlight softened its features, transforming stern guardian into gentle guide, severe protector into loving messenger. He wrapped his fingers around the key, feeling its ancient power pulse against his skin like a heartbeat. 3 keys found, each discovered through faith and perseverance, each leading him closer to the truth that lay hidden in the Vatican's deepest mysteries. But what waited in the vault that required such careful preparation? What song would unlock its mysteries? And what secrets would spill forth like light from an open door? The questions danced in his mind like the torchlight on the walls, but he knew the answers lay ahead in whatever chamber these 3 keys would open together. For now, Matteo stood in the quiet crypt, surrounded by sleeping saints and watchful angels, holding a key that whispered of songs yet unsung and truths yet unrevealed. The weight of destiny settled around him like a cloak, and he felt the gentle presence of all who had walked this path before him, guiding his steps toward whatever revelation awaited in the darkness ahead. Dawn painted the basilica's dome in shades of pearl and rose, its gentle light filtering through the narrow windows of the Vatican's upper chambers, as Matteo traced his steps back through the underground passages. The 3 keys clinked softly against each other in his pocket. Silver, gleaming like moonlight, gold warm as honey, and ancient bronze, dark with the patina of centuries. Each step deeper into the earth carried him further from the waking world above, further from the familiar realm of daylight and duty. The stones beneath his feet grew older as he descended, worn smooth by countless pilgrims whose names had long been forgotten. Shadows danced ahead of his small lantern, reaching into corners where silence had gathered like dust for generations untold. A passage he'd never noticed before branched away from the main tunnel, its entrance so narrow that he might have passed it by 100 times without seeing. Worn symbols carved into the arch matched the markings on the bronze key. Spirals and crosses intertwined with Latin words, too weathered to read clearly. The air grew thick with the scent of old paper and forgotten incense, carrying whispers of prayers offered in languages that predated the modern world. His breathing grew shallow as he followed the passage, the weight of stone pressing down from above. Water had seeped through the ancient mortar in places, leaving crystalline deposits that caught his lantern light like scattered diamonds. The corridor seemed to pulse with its own rhythm, as if the very walls remembered the footsteps of those who had walked this path before him. The corridor opened into a circular chamber that took his breath away. 3 keyholes formed a perfect triangle in a metal door that spanned from floor to ceiling, its surface polished to a mirror shine despite its obvious age. Strange markings surrounded each keyhole, symbols that seemed to shift in his peripheral vision, as if the metal itself held secrets that stirred at his approach. Matteo's hands trembled as he withdrew the keys from his pocket, their weight somehow heavier now than when he had first discovered them. He inserted each key with reverent care, silver on top, where the first star would shine in an evening sky, gold to the left like the warmth of a setting sun, bronze to the right where shadows gathered at twilight. The mechanisms turned with the sound of grinding stone, ancient gears awakening after centuries of silence. In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti. The words slipped from his lips unbidden, A prayer his grandmother had taught him in childhood, now carrying new weight in this sacred place. The door swung inward on hinges that made no sound, as if they had been oiled by angels themselves. Light spilled from within, not the harsh glare of electricity or even the warm flicker of candle flame, but a soft phosphorescence that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat, like the gentle breathing of something alive yet eternal. Scrolls lined the walls in neat rows that stretched up into the shadows of the vaulted ceiling, each one glowing with its own inner light. Some burned bright as embers fresh from a forge. Others pulsed dimly like dying stars in a winter sky. A few flickered with colours he had no names for. Blues deeper than midnight, golds richer than autumn wheat, silvers that seemed to contain the essence of moonbeams. The combined light cast strange shadows that danced across the curved ceiling, painting stories in light and darkness that shifted too quickly for mortal eyes to follow. Matteo stepped inside, his footfalls echoing in the sacred space like whispered prayers. The air tasted of honey and starlight, of ancient wisdom and dreams preserved in amber. The closest scroll radiated warmth when he passed his hand near it, though the parchment itself remained cool to the touch, as if the light came not from the material, but from something far more ethereal within. Words in forgotten languages spiraled across their surfaces in luminous ink that seemed to move as he watched. Some scripts he recognized from his years in the archives, Latin, Greek, Aramaic, but others defied identification, their letters flowing like water, like music made visible. The texts seemed to breathe with their own life, expanding and contracting as if the very words were drawing breath. High above, morning bells began their song across the 7 hills of Rome. The sound filtered down through layers of stone and centuries, distant yet clear, as if the earth itself carried their resonance into this hidden sanctuary. Each toll seemed to awaken something new in the scrolls, their light brightening and dimming in response to the sacred rhythm above. Matteo stood motionless among the glowing texts, feeling the weight of centuries press against his chest, like a gentle hand seeking to comfort rather than burden. His eyes filled with tears he couldn't explain, tears of wonder, of recognition, of coming home to a place he had never seen, but somehow always known existed. The chamber held more than words. It contained light itself, captured and preserved like honey in ancient amber, like songs waiting to be sung, like prayers that had never stopped being offered. As the bells continued their morning prayer, the scrolls seemed to pulse in perfect harmony, their light rising and falling with each distant toll, creating a symphony of illumination that spoke directly to the soul without need for translation. In this moment, surrounded by the breathing light of sacred texts, Matteo understood that he had found not just a hidden library, but a place where heaven touched earth so gently that even the stones had learned to sing. The whisper that had haunted Matteo's steps now multiplied, filling the vault with echoes. Not one voice, but dozens, no, hundreds, speaking in harmony. Their words rolled through the chamber like waves, each scroll adding its own tone to the chorus. Ancient psalms floated through the air in languages both known and forgotten. Latin merged with Greek, Hebrew intertwined with Aramaic, yet somehow he understood them all. Prayers for peace, songs of rest, promises of eternal calm. Pax vobiscum, sang one voice. Irini imin, answered another. Sholvam laicum, breathed a third. The light from the scrolls pulsed in rhythm with the chant. Waves of warmth washed over him like sunlight on stone. His shoulders relaxed, tension melting away as the voices wrapped around him like a blanket of sound. A phrase repeated, gaining strength with each echo. Be still and know. The words resonated in his chest, his breath falling into rhythm with their cadence. Matteo's knees touched the cool stone floor. His eyes drifted closed as the chorus swelled around him. Each voice carried centuries of devotion, generations of faith distilled into pure song. The smell of ancient parchment mixed with traces of frankincense. Even the air felt different here, heavy with history, yet fresh as morning dew. Time seemed to slow, then stop completely. Peace settled over him like falling snow. The voices grew softer, gentler, as though drawing him deeper into their embrace. His breathing slowed, his mind cleared. In this moment, he understood why these psalms had remained hidden. They weren't meant to be studied or analyzed. They were lullabies for the soul, meant to be experienced in the depths of silence. Matteo knelt in the glow of the ancient scrolls, letting the voices guide him toward perfect stillness. Above, the morning bells faded into memory, leaving only the eternal song of the Psalms. Moonlight slipped through a crack in the vault's ceiling, casting a silver beam across Matteo's hands as he cradled the ancient scroll. The parchment felt warm against his skin, pulsing with a gentle rhythm like a sleeping heartbeat. In the depths of night, he read, his voice barely above a whisper, when stars speak their secrets. The scroll vibrated. A note rose from its surface, pure and clear as mountains spring water. The sound wrapped around his words, weaving through them like golden thread through fabric. Matteo's breath caught. He continued reading, each phrase bringing forth new harmonies. The scrolls around him stirred, adding their own voices to the chorus. High crystalline tones merged with deep, resonant ones that seemed to emerge from the earth itself. His shoulders relaxed. The tension in his neck melted away as the music flowed through him. This wasn't the structured hymns of Sunday Mass or the measured Gregorian chants. This was something older, something that existed before stone and ink. Peace flows like rivers, he read, and cool air brushed his face. The chorus swelled, each scroll contributing its own unique voice until the vault rang with celestial song. The melody reached into the corners of his mind where doubt and fear lurked, smoothing them away like water over stone. His hands stopped shaking. His racing thoughts stilled. Rest comes on wings of light, Matteo whispered. The scrolls responded with a sound like distant bells, like wind through ancient trees, like the space between heartbeats. One by one, the voices faded. The golden glow of the scrolls dimmed until only the moonbeam remained, painting a silver path across the floor. The last note hung in the air like a star before dissolving into silence. Matteo sat in the quiet, feeling the echo of the song in his bones. The vault held only the soft sound of his breathing and the subtle hum that lived in all sacred spaces. The scroll in his hands cooled, returning to its sleep until the next seeker would wake it. But its peace remained, settling over him like a blanket of stars. Matteo, the quiet archivist, stretched out upon the cool, unforgiving marble floor of the vault chamber, allowing his weary bones to sink into the ancient stone. Around him, the ethereal glow emanating from the countless scrolls began to dim, softening into a gentle, rhythmic pulse. that resembled the fleeting dance of fireflies in the tender embrace of a summer twilight. A profound weariness settled over him, and his eyelids grew heavy, succumbing to the quiet assurance of sleep as the ancient dust, undisturbed for centuries, softly settled around his form. As sleep claimed him, the unyielding stone beneath him transformed, melting away into the yielding softness of verdant grass. The Rome he knew, a tapestry woven from basilica and bustling walls, centuries of human footsteps and whispered prayers, dissolved entirely, fading into the untamed wilderness of an age before memory. A forgotten river, its waters deeply black under the distant gleam of starlight, cut a path through the sacred hill, its every ripple a unique, ancient song. These were melodies older than the first Latin prayer, murmurs of creation carried on the wind. 7 hills, unburdened by human structures, rose bare and majestic against the expansive canvas of the night sky, where the grand dome of St. Peter's would one day ascend to pierce the heavens. Only the vast open air now breathed, pure and untainted. Above, countless stars wheeled silently overhead, tracing patterns long lost to the waking world, their light pouring down, pure and unfiltered by the glare of any city. This was the first church. A voice, soft and resonant, seemed to sing from within the flowing water of the river itself. Before marble and before gold, before popes and before prayers. This was when faith lived in the whisper of the wind and the gentle caress of the wave. The river, responding to this unseen melody, split into 7 luminous streams, each one glowing with an inner light, as if infused with the starlight above. They wove together, intertwining gracefully, where the Vatican gardens would one day bloom, forming a mesmerizing spiral of light. In their tranquil confluence, Matteo saw countless faces emerge from the shimmering foam, the humble faces of shepherds, the serene countenances of saints, and the earnest, seeking eyes of souls who had yearned for truth across the vast expanse of ages. Above, the constellations danced in forgotten formations, aligning themselves into patterns he had never witnessed. They seemed to spell out words in a celestial language, a tongue so ancient and profound that his sleeping mind almost grasped its meaning. The stars, as if in a cosmic offering, poured their cascading light into the luminous streams until the separation between water and sky dissolved, becoming one seamless, endless field of radiant light. From the heart of these sacred rivers, a fish, scales flashing with an almost blinding silver, leapt gracefully into the air. As it arced through the ethereal space, its very form began to shift, to transform. From fish to a gentle dove, from dove to a soaring angel, and finally, from angel to a brilliant, nascent star. As it ascended, it scattered drops of shimmering light, and where these luminous droplets touched the earth, the first enduring stones of Rome began quietly to form. Suddenly, Matteo's eyes fluttered open. The profound stillness of the vault embraced him, yet something was altered. Candles, though he had not lit them himself, now flickered softly in their ancient holders. Their warm, living light painted the sacred vault in tender shades of amber and gold, washing away the dream's lingering darkness. His heart beat slow and steady, filled with a profound and unwavering peace, a peace born from the revelation of that first, timeless Rome, the memory of starlight, vast and pure, still danced, a gentle after-image behind his awakened eyes. He reached up, a hand moving instinctively, and gently touched his cheek. To his wonder, he found it damp, as if kissed by the waters of a vanished river. A sliver of sunlight pierced the vault's ancient stone, cutting through centuries of darkness. Matteo blinked away the remnants of his dream as the beam touched his face. The light spread across the floor in a perfect circle, surrounding him like a halo. His breath caught. The scroll's soft ember glow mingled with the sunbeam, creating patterns that danced across the marble. The circle drew itself around him, precise as a compass line. How can this be? Dust motes sparkled in the shaft of light, swirling like stars. The air changed within the circle, warmer, gentler. Each breath came easier, as though the light itself filtered away his worries. His shoulders relaxed. The weight of discovery, of responsibility, lifted from him like morning mist. Colors shifted in the ring of light, gold, silver, pearl. They moved with liquid grace, never crossing the boundary. Outside the circle, shadows deepened. Inside, peace wrapped around him like a blanket. Matteo crossed his legs, settling deeper into stillness. The stone floor no longer felt hard against his body. The circle held him, cradled him, whispered without words that he was exactly where he needed to be. Hours passed. The beam of light stayed fixed, defying the sun's movement. Matteo sat motionless, watching the play of light and shadow. His mind cleared of questions. The mystery of the Psalms, the keys, the forgotten Pope, all faded into the simple truth of this moment. The scrolls pulsed softer now, matching his heartbeat. Their glow merged with the circle's radiance until he couldn't tell where one light ended and another began. Dusk approached. Purple shadows crept across the vault floor, but stopped at the circle's edge. Matteo remained still, breathing in the silence. The light had shown him something beyond words, a glimpse of eternity in a ring of sunlight. The circle began to fade as evening descended. Matteo watched it dissolve, knowing its blessing would stay with him. In the growing darkness, the scroll's ember light took over, keeping their ancient vigil. Twilight crept into the vault like a tender hand drawing a curtain across the day, painting the ancient walls in shades of deep violet and burnished amber. The circle of light that had surrounded Matteo began to dim with the fading daylight. But as it retreated, a new radiance emerged from the scrolls themselves, a gentle luminescence that seemed to breathe with the rhythm of creation itself. Their faint glow pulsed like a heartbeat, like the steady rise and fall of a sleeping child's chest. Matteo knelt on the cool stone floor, his movements slow and reverent. He unrolled one of the sacred scrolls across his lap, fingers trembling as they traced the luminous script that seemed to dance beneath his touch. The words shifted and shimmered, no longer the stern commandments or weighty proclamations he had expected to find hidden in the Vatican's deepest vaults. Instead, a melody rose from the ancient parchment, soft as a mother's voice calling her children home, gentle as rain on summer leaves. "These aren't prophecies at all," he whispered, his voice barely audible in the hushed chamber. The words echoed softly off the curved walls, carrying with them a note of wonder and disbelief. The scroll's song wrapped around him like a warm blanket on a winter's night, and tears pricked at the corners of his eyes. not from sorrow, but from a joy so pure it seemed to come from his very soul. Their lullabies. Each verse flowed into the next, like water finding its way to the sea. Ancient words of comfort meant not to guide kingdoms or govern nations, but to heal wounded hearts, to grant rest to the weary, to bring peace to troubled souls. The Vatican had protected these scrolls through centuries of war and change, guarding them not because they held earthly power or political secrets, but because they carried something far more precious, pure, unconditional love distilled into song. He lifted another scroll with hands that shook with reverence. This one sang of starlight dancing on still water, of gentle rain falling on olive leaves in groves older than memory. Another murmured of dawn breaking over silent hills where shepherds watched their flocks, its verses painted in hues of rose and gold. They were the songs mothers had sung to their children since the very beginning of time, the melodies that had echoed in caves and cottages, in palaces and humble dwellings, now preserved in sacred script that glowed with its own inner light. The chamber filled with their quiet music, a symphony of whispered comfort that seemed to emanate from the very stones themselves. Matteo felt his shoulders relax for the first time in months, the constant tension melting away like snow in spring sunshine. The weight of his seeking, the burden of his quest for hidden truths, lifted from his chest as if carried away by invisible hands. These scrolls weren't meant to change the world through revelation or upheaval. They were meant to give it rest, to offer solace to every soul that yearned for peace. "Sleep now, little ones," he read aloud from one of the verses, the words glowing brighter as his voice gave them life. "The angels keep watch through the longest night." The phrase hung in the air like incense, sweet and comforting, filling every corner of the sacred space with its gentle promise. Matteo rose slowly, his knees protesting after kneeling so long on the ancient stones. He gathered the scrolls with the reverence of a priest handling holy relics, each one seeming to hum with contentment at his touch. One by one, he returned them to their alcoves carved into the chamber walls, each finding its place like a bird settling into its nest after a long journey. The scrolls seemed to nestle into their stone cradles with sighs of satisfaction, as if they too were finding rest after their brief awakening. The last scroll slipped from his hands with a whisper of silk against stone, settling into its alcove with a final, gentle glow. Through the narrow crack in the ceiling, high above, the first evening star winked into view, its ancient light piercing the growing darkness. The starlight touched the scrolls in their resting places, and they hummed in response, a lullaby for the night itself, a song of comfort for the turning world. The sound was so soft it might have been imagined, yet it filled the chamber with a presence both profound and peaceful. Matteo stepped back, his sandaled feet silent on the worn stones, watching the scroll's soft glow pulse in rhythm with something beyond hearing. The mystery he had sought for so long wasn't about hidden power or dangerous prophecy, about secrets that could topple kingdoms or reshape faith. It was about peace, simple, eternal peace, carried through centuries in these gentle songs of comfort, preserved by those who understood that sometimes the greatest truth was the quietest one. Above him, more stars emerged in the darkening sky, glittering like scattered gems on deep blue velvet, each one a note in the vast lullaby of creation. The scrolls would sleep here in their ancient sanctuary, safe in their stone cradle beneath the eternal city, singing their timeless songs of comfort to anyone who needed rest, to any soul who wandered in darkness seeking light. And somewhere in the night above, Rome itself seemed to sigh and settle, as if the whole city could feel the gentle presence of these sacred lullabies, keeping watch through another turning of the world. Midnight draped the vault in shadow, broken only by the scroll's soft pulse of ancient light. The stone walls held their breath, as though the very chamber waited for something beyond time itself. Matteo stood before the alcoves, his weathered hands moving with reverent care as he arranged each precious scroll in its appointed place. The parchment seemed to hum with quiet contentment, like sleeping children being tucked into their beds. He had grown accustomed to the solitude of this sacred work, the gentle rhythm of preservation that had become his calling. But tonight, something shifted in the silence. A new light began to spill across the worn stone floor, different from the scroll's familiar glow. This radiance carried the quality of dawn breaking over ancient hills. He turned slowly, his breath catching in his throat. The air before him shimmered like heat waves rising from summer streets, bending and flowing with impossible grace. Reality itself seemed to soften, making space for something that belonged to neither earth nor heaven, yet somehow to both. A figure stepped through the shimmer, radiant as moonlight dancing on still water, the same beloved face that had watched him from the portrait above, the forgotten saint whose eyes had followed his every movement through countless nights of study. But now those eyes blinked with living warmth, no longer trapped behind layers of paint and varnish. Her features held the same serene wisdom, the same maternal tenderness, but animated now with breath and presence. Her white robes moved like liquid starlight, rippling and flowing, though no earthly wind stirred the chamber's sacred air. Each fold caught and reflected the gentle illumination that seemed to emanate from her very being. A golden light poured from her skin like honey from a broken comb, casting shadows that danced on the ancient walls with the grace of prayers made visible. "You've guarded these all along," Matteo whispered, his voice catching in his throat like a bird afraid to take flight. The words felt inadequate, too small to contain the magnitude of recognition flooding through him. Through the portrait, all these centuries. She smiled, and the expression transformed her face into something that belonged to both earth and eternity. "The painted eyes were my window into your world," she said, her voice carrying the texture of gentle rain falling on summer roses. Each word seemed to settle into the silence like drops of nectar. "I watched the centuries pass like pages turning in an endless book, waiting for one who would understand their true purpose, not as treasure to be hoarded, but as gifts to be cherished." The saint's bare feet made no sound against the stone floor as she moved closer to where Matteo stood. Each step left traces of golden light that lingered for a heartbeat before fading like settling stardust, as though the very ground blessed her passage. Her presence filled the vault with the scent of summer gardens in full bloom, jasmine and lavender, roses heavy with morning dew, all the fragrances of paradise distilled into gentle breath. "The Psalms needed protection," she continued, lifting her hand with fluid grace. At her gesture, one of the scrolls rose from its alcove and floated toward her like a butterfly drawn to light. The parchment glowed more brightly as it approached, responding to her touch with visible joy. Not from those who would destroy them in their ignorance or fear, but from those who would twist them into weapons of power and dominion, rather than allowing them to remain what they have always been, instruments of peace, lullabies for weary souls. Matteo watched in wonder as understanding bloomed within him like flowers opening to sunlight. Now he saw why her portrait had seemed so vibrantly alive, why those painted eyes had held such depth and recognition. This was no stern guardian of forbidden knowledge, no keeper of secrets meant only for the worthy. She was something far more precious, a mother of mercy, a protector of humanity's deepest longing for rest and peace. She stepped forward again, her radiance washing over him like warm summer rain. The light that surrounded her held no burning heat, only gentle recognition, the kind of illumination that comes when a long-lost child finally finds their way home. Time seemed to pause around them, suspended like dust motes in cathedral sunbeams. The air grew thick with the weight of centuries, all her patient watching and waiting, condensed into this single, perfect moment of revelation. The time of revelation has come at last, she whispered, and even her whisper carried music, the distant sound of harps played by angels, of brooks singing their way to the sea. The watch is ending, dear archivist, and with it, a new chapter of peace begins. The saint raised her hand, palm facing outward. Silver light spilled between her fingers like water, filling the vault with gentle luminescence. The cold stone walls softened under her glow, as though transformed to velvet. Child of books and silence, her voice carried the warmth of summer wind through leaves. You have carried the weight of seeking for so long. Matteo's legs trembled, the countless nights of searching, of following whispers through darkness, pressed down on his shoulders. Yet her presence lifted that weight, dissolving years of questions into peace. Rest now. Her fingers traced a circle in the air. The mystery is peace. Light cascaded around him in waves, each pulse gentler than the last. The vault filled with a glow that felt like dawn breaking through morning mist, like the moment between waking and sleeping, when dreams still linger. His eyelids grew heavy. The stone floor beneath his feet seemed to cradle him, centuries of sacred silence rising up to embrace his weary bones. Understanding washed through him. The Psalms were never meant to be solved, only felt. Their power lay not in their words, but in their eternal whisper of comfort. Tears rolled down his cheeks, each one catching the saint's light like stars falling. His breath slowed, matching the rhythm of the glowing scrolls. The mysterious footsteps, the burning candles, the moving eyes in the portrait, all paths had led here, to this moment of perfect rest. Matteo bowed deeply, his forehead touching the cool stone. Peace settled over him like fresh snow, pure and quiet. The saint's presence wrapped around him, a blanket of blessed silence. His tears left small dark circles on the ancient floor, each one a prayer of gratitude. At last, the weight of searching lifted from his heart, replaced by the lightness of simply being. Nighttime crept across Vatican City in waves of deepening blue. The last chime of St. Peter's bells faded into the air, leaving only the whisper of wind between marble columns. A cat paused on an ancient wall, ears pricked toward the silence spreading from the basilica. One by one, shutters closed along narrow streets. Candles winked out in weathered windowsills. The usual chorus of footsteps and voices dwindled until even the cobblestones held their breath. At the edge of the Borgo, an old woman crossed herself before drawing her curtains. "The city grows quiet tonight," she murmured to her rosary beads. Something in the air felt different, not the usual urban hush, but a deeper peace that settled like silk over Rome's 7 hills. Along the Tiber, the water's eternal song softened to a lullaby. Waves that normally slapped against stone banks now kissed them instead, as if invisible hands had gentled the current. Fish swam slower, their silver scales catching starlight in lazy swirls. The moon hung low over the Vatican gardens, painting silver paths between cypress trees. Not even leaves rustled. Fountains that had flowed since ancient times seemed to whisper rather than splash, their waters forming perfect mirrors for the sky above. High on the Palatine Hill, a nightbird tucked its head beneath its wing instead of calling. The forums below lay wrapped in silence, columns casting shorter shadows as the night deepened toward true dark. Stars emerged one by one, unusually bright in the city sky. They shimmered over still rooftops, their light touching domes and spires with gentle radiance. Even the ever-present glow of Rome's street lamps seemed muted, as though the eternal city had finally found its moment of perfect rest. The Dome of Saint. Peter's Basilica caught the moonlight, its curves luminous against the ink-black sky. Silver light pooled in the crevices where Michelangelo's hand had shaped stone into dreams centuries ago. Through empty piazzas, a cool breeze swept away the day's footprints. The Swiss guards stood motionless at their posts, more shadow than flesh in the depths of night. Their halberds gleamed like fallen stars. Behind closed shutters, Cardinal Rossi turned in his sleep, his prayer beads clicking against the bedside table. In the papal apartments, only the night lamps kept their quiet vigil. The corridors that hours ago had echoed with countless footsteps now held nothing but stillness. Yet the dome remained awake. Its cross pierced the darkness, a sentinel guarding mysteries below. Beneath its watch, the hidden chambers whispered their ancient songs. The vault of psalms pulsed with soft light, like a heart beating in the earth's depths. In the archives, leather-bound books sighed on their shelves. Maps curled at their edges, their secrets safe in shadow. The portrait of the saint, now empty of her presence, smiled at something beyond the frame. A nightbird called once, its voice carrying across the Vatican gardens, where fountains played their endless songs. The water caught moonlight and scattered it like broken glass across the paths where Matteo had walked just hours before. The dome's glow intensified for a moment, as though responding to an unseen signal. It held secrets now, the psalms, the keys, the whispers that had guided an archivist through darkness toward light. These mysteries rested secure beneath its watch, waiting for the next seeker of truth. High above, clouds began their slow dance across the moon's face. They drew their gauzy veils across the silver light, and the dome's radiance dimmed. Shadows deepened in the courtyards and crept up the basilica's walls, until only the cross remained visible, a darker shape against dark sky. Matteo sank into the ancient stone bench, his weary muscles unwinding after weeks of searching through corridors that seemed to breathe with secrets. The hidden chapel enfolded him in its sanctified darkness, broken only by the eternal dance of candlelight across weathered walls that had witnessed centuries of prayer. His fingers traced the rough edges of the bench, worn smooth by countless faithful hands that had sought this same solace. The stones themselves seemed to pulse with accumulated reverence, each surface polished by the touch of pilgrims who had come before. Shadows stretched and contracted like living things, flowing across the carved saints that watched from their alcoves with eyes full of understanding. "It was always here," he whispered to the shadows, his voice barely disturbing the sacred hush. The mystery lived in every stone, in every breath of air, waiting for someone to truly listen. The candles flickered in response, their flames bowing and rising like prayers made visible, like the very souls of the faithful ascending toward heaven. One by one, they burned lower, golden light pooling and growing puddles of wax that caught and held the chapel's ancient peace. The air hung thick with the weight of sacred silence, perfumed with centuries of incense and whispered confessions. His hand found the scroll fragment in his pocket, just a small piece he'd been permitted to keep, a tangible reminder of wonders beyond description. The parchment felt warm against his skin, alive with remembered song, thrumming with the echoes of celestial voices that had sung through its words. He didn't need to read it anymore. The sacred verses had etched themselves into his heart, like the 10 Commandments carved in stone, becoming part of his very being. Cool air drifted down from somewhere above, carrying the faintest echo of Rome's nighttime peace through hidden passages and forgotten vents. The city slept in blissful ignorance, unaware of the treasures that lay beneath its cobbled streets like pearls hidden in darkness. But that was as it should be. Matteo knew with the certainty of faith itself. Some mysteries were meant to rest in sacred darkness, revealing themselves only to those called by divine providence to seek them out. His body settled deeper into the stone embrace, feeling the bench mold itself around his form, as if carved specifically for this moment. The saint's blessing still lingered in the air around him, wrapped about his shoulders like a mother's embrace, like the wings of guardian angels folding him in protection. How strange and wonderful that his life's work had led him here, not to fame or earthly glory, but to this quiet surrender in a forgotten chapel where heaven touched earth. A smile touched his lips as his breathing slowed to match the gentle rhythm of the chapel's own breath. The candles cast his shadow on the wall, a gentle giant, finally at peace with his purpose, his searching, his calling. His eyelids grew heavy, weighted with the deep satisfaction of fulfilled purpose, of mysteries unveiled and hearts opened. The chapel seemed to cradle him in its ancient arms, stone walls becoming soft as silk, harsh edges worn away by time and devotion into perfect curves of comfort. He heard the whispers one last time, now clear as silver bells ringing across the 7 hills. Rest, faithful one. Rest in the peace you have earned. Matteo closed his eyes, his smile deepening like a river flowing toward the sea. The darkness behind his lids glowed with remembered light, the scrolls singing their celestial songs, the saint's radiant face, the circle of blessing that had surrounded him like a crown of stars. All of it washed over him like gentle waves on a distant shore, carrying away the last traces of worry and wonder, leaving only perfect peace. His hands folded across his chest with the reverence of a knight laid to rest, fingers still curved protectively around the scroll fragment that pulsed with warmth like a beating heart. The stone bench cradled him like an old friend welcoming him home as the last candle burned steady and true. its flame unwavering in the sacred stillness. And in that forgotten chapel beneath the eternal city, time itself seemed to pause, holding this moment of perfect rest like a prayer suspended between earth and heaven. Night draped itself over Vatican City like a velvet cloak. The last echoes of footsteps faded from marble halls, leaving only the whisper of wind through ancient stones. Stars pierced the darkness above the dome, their light falling softly on empty courtyards and locked gates. Deep beneath the gardens, in the vault of sacred songs, the glowing scrolls dimmed to a gentle ember. The saint stood watch, her radiance casting no shadow, her smile holding centuries of peace. Her painted eyes in the portrait above had seen generations pass, waiting for this moment when the psalms could finally rest. Matteo slept in the hidden chapel, his breath matching the rhythm of the dying candles. The silver key lay still in his open palm, its inscription catching the last traces of light. His search had led him through whispers and wonder, through locked doors and luminous truth, to find that the greatest mystery was simply peace itself. The moonlight filtered through cracks in the stone ceiling, painting silver patterns across the floor. In the silence, the ancient walls seemed to exhale, as if the very foundations of faith could finally settle into slumber. The air grew thick with dreams, heavy with the weight of fulfilled prophecy. A soft breeze curled through the underground passages, carrying the scent of rain and roses. It touched Matteo's face like a blessing, stirring the silver-grey hair at his temples. His smile deepened in sleep, at peace with the knowledge that some secrets were meant not to be revealed, but to be felt in the heart's quiet moments. Above, Rome dreamed beneath a tapestry of stars. The Tiber flowed in hushed murmurs past Vatican walls. Bell towers stood sentinel, their bronze tongues still. Even the nightbirds held their songs, as if nature itself understood the sanctity of this silence. And now the words grew quiet, fading like footprints in sand. The Gospels rested in their eternal vigil, their light dimming to starlit whispers. The night carried all into silence, into dreams, into peace.